I won $80 million in the lottery, and I told absolutely no one. Not because I was greedy, not because I wanted to keep it all to myself, but because I needed to know the truth about the people who called themselves my family. So I ran a test, a simple test. I called each of them my sister, my brothers, my aunts, and I asked for help. Just $600. Rent was short, I said. I'd pay them back next week. Every single one of them said no. We're struggling right now. The kids need new shoes. Maybe ask someone else. $600. 2 weeks later, I opened Facebook. And there they were, the same people who couldn't afford to help me, posting photos from their $15,000 vacation in Dubai. Champagne. 5-star hotels. Designer shopping bags. That's when I realized they didn't lack money. They lacked love. For me. But here's what they didn't know. While they were celebrating in Dubai, I was setting up something they would never see coming. Something that would expose exactly who they really were. Something that would force them to reveal their darkest secrets. Because you see, this story isn't just about a lottery ticket. It's about a childhood accident that nearly killed me. It's about a sister who tried to murder me twice, once when I was 8 years old, and once when I was 36. It's about the moment I faked my own death and watched what my family did when they thought I was gone. If you stay with me until the end, you'll witness the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever seen. Because the family that tried to bury me, they forgot one important detail. I've always been very good at rising from the dead. My name is Grace Powell. I'm 36 years old, and until recently I worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet, retail during the day, waitressing at night. But before I tell you about the lottery ticket that changed everything, before I explain how I faked my own death and brought my sister to justice, you need to understand where this all began. Because the woman I became wasn't shaped by $80 million. She was shaped by a childhood where love was always conditional, and I was never quite enough to earn it. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Middle-class neighborhood, 2-story colonial with a white picket fence, American flags on the 4th of July. My father worked in insurance. My mother stayed home with us kids. We had family dinners every Sunday. From the street, we were the picture of normalcy. But inside those walls, I learned very early that not all neglect leaves bruises you can see. I was the middle child of 5. Jennifer was the oldest, 8 years ahead of me, beautiful and confident in ways I never understood. Then came Robert and Marcus, the golden boys who could do no wrong. I arrived next, and finally Sarah, the baby everyone doted on. By the time I was 6 years old, I had already learned my role in this family. I was the helper, the responsible one, the child who didn't need attention because I was so mature for my age. I remember being 7 years old, standing on a step stool at the kitchen sink washing dishes, while my mother watched television in the next room. My hands were red and pruned from the hot water, my arms aching, but I didn't complain. Jennifer was at a friend's house. The boys were playing video games. Sarah was being rocked to sleep by our father. And I was cleaning up after dinner just like I did every night. When I finished and went to show my mother the clean kitchen, hoping for a smile or a thank you, she barely looked up from her show. "Good girl, Grace," she said absently. "Now go check if Sarah needs a diaper change." That was my childhood in a nutshell. Good girl, Grace. Now do this other thing. The strange part was everyone thought I was lucky. Teachers praised me for being so responsible. Neighbors commented on what a little helper I was. My parents accepted compliments about how mature and independent I was, as if it were something to be proud of, rather than something they'd forced on me out of convenience. They had taken a child and turned her into unpaid labor, and somehow I was supposed to be grateful for the opportunity. I cooked breakfast for my siblings before school starting at age 9. I packed lunches, including my own. I did laundry sorted by colors the way my mother had shown me once, and expected me to remember forever. I helped Sarah with her homework while Robert and Marcus played sports. I babysat every weekend so my parents could have date nights while Jennifer was allowed to go out with friends. And the worst part, they truly believed they were good parents. They told people they were teaching me responsibility, giving me skills I'd need as an adult. What they were really teaching me was that my needs didn't matter, that asking for help was selfish, that my worth was measured entirely by what I could do for others. The few times I tried to push back, the response was always the same. When I was 11 and asked if I could join the school play instead of babysitting on Thursday nights, my mother looked at me with such disappointment. "Grace, you know how much we rely on you. Your father and I have sacrificed so much to give you all a good life. Is it really too much to ask for a little help in return?" The guilt was crushing. I never asked again. When I was 13 and wanted to try out for the soccer team, my father shook his head sadly. "Someone needs to be home when Sarah gets off the bus, Grace. You're the only one we can trust with that responsibility. Don't you want to help your family?" It wasn't presented as a choice. It was presented as a moral test that I was failing by even asking. So I learned to stop asking. I learned to watch instead. I noticed everything: how Jennifer could demand new clothes and get them, while my requests were met with lectures about being materialistic. How the boys could leave dishes in the sink without consequence while I'd be scolded if I forgot even one. How Sarah was cuddled and comforted when she cried while my tears were met with, "Grace, you're too old for this." I became a student of my own family, cataloging the inconsistencies, the double standards, the casual cruelty that masqueraded as normal family life. I learned to read the room, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to make myself useful enough to be kept around, but not important enough to be valued. I learned that being needed and being loved were two entirely different things, and I learned to be silent. Because in my family, the squeaky wheel didn't get the grease. It got reminded of how much the family had sacrificed. It got made to feel selfish for having needs at all. So I became the quietest person in every room, the one who listened more than she spoke, who observed more than she participated. People often commented on how calm I was, how I never seemed upset or angry. They thought it was maturity. It wasn't. It was survival. I had learned that my emotions were inconvenient, that my pain was less important than everyone else's comfort, that the only way to exist in my family was to take up as little space as possible. I didn't know it then, but being invisible was training. But there was one moment in my childhood when being quiet almost got me killed. Or maybe it did get me killed in a way that had nothing to do with my heartbeat stopping. I was 8 years old, and what happened on those stairs changed everything about who I was allowed to be in my family. It was a Saturday morning in October. I remember because the leaves outside were turning orange and red, and I'd been looking forward to jumping in the piles our father had raked the day before. Jennifer was 16, then home from a sleepover in one of her moods. She'd been angry all morning about something I never knew what. As the middle child, I'd learned not to ask questions when the older kids were upset. It was safer to stay out of the way. I was at the top of the stairs heading down to get breakfast. I remember I was wearing my favorite pink pajamas with the little flowers on them. I remember thinking about whether there would be pancakes or just cereal. I remember the sound of Jennifer's footsteps behind me faster than normal. And then I remember a pressure against my back, a moment of weightlessness, and then nothing but pain. The fall felt like it lasted forever. My body hit the stairs, tumbling each impact, sending shockwaves through my small frame. When I finally stopped at the bottom, I couldn't move. I couldn't feel my legs. I tried to scream, but the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, wondering why nobody was helping me. Jennifer appeared at the top of the stairs. I'll never forget the look on her face. Not concern, but something else. Something cold. Then she started screaming. "Mom! Dad, Grace fell!" Grace fell down the stairs. Her voice was perfect. Panic, perfect fear. By the time my parents rushed in, she was crying, saying she'd told me not to run, that she'd tried to grab me but couldn't reach me in time. The ambulance ride is a blur. The hospital is sharper in my memory. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. They told me later that I'd fractured 3 vertebrae in my spine. The surgeon, a kind-faced man whose name I've forgotten, explained that I was very lucky, a few millimeters different, and I would have been paralyzed for life. As it was, they needed to operate immediately. I was in the hospital for 4 months. 4 months of surgeries, recovery, infections, setbacks. 4 months of physical therapy that made me cry every single day. 4 months of learning to walk again, to stand without support, to exist in a body that had been broken and put back together with metal rods and screws that I still carry inside me. But something else happened during those 4 months. There was a nurse named Margaret Chen, an older Asian woman with gentle hands and sharp eyes. She was the one who noticed things that didn't quite add up. The bruising on my back wasn't consistent with a tumbling fall. There were marks that suggested I'd been pushed with force, not just lost my balance. She asked me questions, careful questions about what I remembered. I told her the truth as I knew it. I remembered being at the top of the stairs and then falling. I remembered Jennifer behind me. But I was 8 years old in terrible pain and terrified. When Margaret asked if anyone had touched me before I fell, I froze. I could see my parents in the hallway through the window talking with doctors. I could see Jennifer sitting in the waiting room playing the devastated sister. And I said what I was supposed to say, I fell by myself. Margaret didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. She documented everything, took extra photographs of my injuries, wrote detailed notes, tried to escalate her concerns to her supervisors. But my parents found out. I don't know how, but they did. Suddenly there were lawyers, stern men in expensive suits who spoke to the hospital administrators. There were threats of lawsuits for false accusations and defamation. Another doctor was brought in, someone who'd gone to school with my father, and he said the injuries could absolutely be from an accidental fall. Child Protective Services came. A tired-looking woman with a clipboard asked me the same questions Margaret had asked, but this time my parents were in the room. Jennifer was there too. Tears streaming down her face, saying it was all her fault for not watching me more carefully, for not stopping me from running. The CPS worker looked at our nice house, our well-dressed parents, Jennifer's perfect, devastated sister act, and me, a little girl who just wanted to go home. When she asked me directly, "Did someone push you, Grace?" I shook my head. "I fell," I whispered. "I was running, and I fell." The case was closed. Margaret was fired from the hospital shortly after, though officially it was for budget cuts. I found out years later that she'd fought back, tried to make noise about what she'd seen, and my family had made sure she'd never work in a hospital in our state again. They had money connections and the appearance of respectability. She had the truth, but the truth wasn't enough. When I finally came home from the hospital, something fundamental had changed. It wasn't just my body, though, that was different too. Weaker, marked by scars and chronic pain that flares up every time the weather changes. It was my place in the family. Before the accident, I'd been the helper, the responsible one. After the accident, I was the burden. The one who'd caused trouble. The one who'd cost them money and hospital bills and lawyer fees. The one who'd brought CPS into their perfect home. Nobody said it directly, of course. That wasn't how my family operated. But it was there in every interaction. When I struggled to carry laundry baskets because my back hurt, I was reminded that I needed to be more careful, more aware of my limitations. When I couldn't do all the chores I used to do, there were sighs and comments about how hard this was on everyone. When I needed follow-up doctor appointments, there were pointed conversations about the cost, about sacrifice, about how the family was pulling together to take care of me. The message was clear. I owed them. I owed them for the medical bills. I owed them for the stress. I owed them for not pressing charges against Jennifer, though nobody ever said what charges there might have been. I owed them for choosing to believe me when I said I fell, even though I'm not sure anyone actually believed it. I became the family debt, and I would be paying it off for the rest of my childhood and beyond. Some families don't forgive. They assign roles. I left home the day after I graduated high school. I was 18 years old, and I'd been saving every dollar I could from part-time work since I was 15. I had exactly $3,200 in a bank account my parents didn't know about, and a studio apartment lined up across town that cost $500 a month. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving until the morning I walked out the door with 2 suitcases and everything I owned. My mother was surprised, almost offended. "You're just going to leave, just like that after everything we've done for you." There it was again, that phrase that had haunted my entire childhood. Everything we've done for you. As if raising me had been some extraordinary act of charity rather than the basic obligation of parenthood. I didn't argue. I just said I'd found a job with better hours and needed to be closer to work. It was easier than the truth. The truth was, I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Every room held memories of being invisible, being used, being reminded that I was the one who owed something rather than the one who was owed basic love and respect. My back ached every morning when I woke up in my childhood bed, whether from the old injury or the weight of expectation. I could never tell. I needed to find out who I was when I wasn't defined by what I could do for other people. Those first years on my own were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. I worked at a department store during the day, folding clothes and dealing with difficult customers who treated retail workers like we were barely human. At night, I waitressed at a chain restaurant carrying heavy trays that made my back scream, smiling through the pain because tips depended on appearing cheerful. I came home at midnight exhausted to an apartment so small I could touch both walls if I stood in the middle and stretched out my arms. But it was mine. Nobody could tell me I owed them for the roof over my head. I thought about college sometimes. I'd been a decent student in high school when I'd had time to study between all the household responsibilities. But college required time and money I didn't have. Every dollar I made went to rent, food, utilities, and the slow accumulation of savings that I guarded like treasure. I told myself maybe someday when I'd built up enough of a cushion. Someday never came. What did come were the phone calls from my family, not to check on me, not to ask how I was doing in my new life. They called when they needed something. Jennifer needed someone to watch her kids for a weekend while she and her husband went to a wedding. Could I do it? Marcus needed money for a car down payment, just $2,000 he'd pay me back as soon as he got his tax refund. Sarah was moving and needed help packing and loading the truck. Robert's wife was sick and someone needed to bring them meals for a week. And I said yes. Every single time I said yes. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it was habit. 18 years of being the helper don't disappear overnight. Maybe it was hope, some pathetic part of me that still believed if I was useful enough, they'd eventually see me as valuable. Maybe it was fear that if I said no, I'd lose them completely. And despite everything, the thought of having no family at all terrified me. So I rearranged my work schedule to babysit Jennifer's children for 3 months straight. Not a weekend, it turned out, but 3 whole months while she dealt with some crisis she never fully explained. I took extra shifts to cover the hours I missed, worked myself to exhaustion, and when it was finally over, Jennifer picked up her kids and said, "Thanks, Grace. You're a lifesaver." No offer to pay me. No acknowledgement of the sacrifice. Just thanks as casual as if I'd held a door open for her. Marcus never paid back the $2,000. When I finally mentioned it 6 months later, carefully apologetically, he looked confused. "Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. I'm kind of tight right now, maybe next month." Next month never came. Eventually I stopped asking. The money was just gone, and apparently so was any sense that he owed me anything. I kept a mental tally, not out of bitterness exactly, but out of a growing sense of unreality. Was I crazy? Was I wrong to expect some reciprocity? I started paying attention to how they treated each other versus how they treated me. When Robert needed help moving, Marcus and Jennifer both showed up. When Jennifer's car broke down, Robert lent her his spare vehicle for 2 weeks. When Sarah had her first baby, everyone rallied around her with gifts and meals and offers of support. But when I got the flu so badly I could barely get out of bed, I called my mother to ask if someone could bring me some groceries. "Grace, honey, everyone's so busy right now. Can't you just order delivery?" I was too sick to argue, too feverish to explain that I couldn't afford delivery fees when I was missing work. I struggled to the store myself, dizzy and nauseated because apparently my needs were always negotiable. I started seeing my family the way an anthropologist might observe a tribe. I cataloged their patterns, their unspoken rules, their hierarchy. I was at the bottom, I realized. Not because I was the least successful or the least intelligent, but because I'd allowed myself to be. I'd trained them through 18 years of always saying yes, always being available, always putting their needs before my own, that my time and my resources were free for the taking. And the strangest thing was, they genuinely didn't see anything wrong with it. When we gathered for holidays events I attended out of obligation rather than joy, they talked about family values, about sticking together, about being there for each other. They seemed to truly believe they were a close, supportive family. The fact that the support only flowed in one direction didn't register with them at all. I became two people. On the surface, I was still Grace the helper. Grace, the reliable one, Grace who never complained. I smiled at family dinners and brought the dishes I was expected to bring, and listened to their problems and offered solutions they rarely took. But underneath, I was someone else entirely. Someone who was watching, recording, analyzing. Someone who was slowly, methodically realizing that this wasn't love. This had never been love. By the time I turned 36, I'd given up hoping things would change. I'd given up the fantasy that one day someone would notice how much I gave and offer something in return. I'd accepted that this was simply who they were and who I was to them. I was useful, not valued. I was convenient, not cherished. And that was never going to change unless something fundamental shifted in our dynamic. I never asked for help. That's why they didn't see it coming. I'd been buying lottery tickets for about 3 years. Not religiously, not with any real hope, but the way some people buy a coffee on their way to work, a small ritual, a brief moment of what if, before reality set back in. Every Tuesday and Friday I'd stop at the convenience store between my apartment and the department store where I worked, and I'd spend $5 on quick picks. I never checked the numbers right away. I'd stuff the tickets in my wallet and forget about them until the next week, when I'd pull them out, confirm they were worthless, and throw them away. That Tuesday in March started like any other. I was exhausted from a double shift the night before I'd covered for a coworker at the restaurant who'd called in sick, which meant I'd worked from 9 in the morning until nearly 1 in the morning. My back was killing me, that deep ache that came from carrying too many trays, standing too long, existing in a body that had never fully recovered from being broken at age 8. I bought my ticket, exchanged the usual pleasantries with the clerk who knew me by sight if not by name, and went home to my small apartment. I don't know what made me check the numbers that night instead of waiting. Maybe I was too tired to sleep, too wired from exhaustion to settle down. Maybe it was the quiet of my apartment, the way silence sometimes pressed in on me, and made me need something, anything to focus on. I sat on my second-hand couch with my laptop, pulled up the lottery website, and fished the ticket out of my wallet. The first number matched. That wasn't unusual. I'd matched 1 or 2 numbers plenty of times, won $5 or $10 here and there. The second number matched. Still not remarkable. The third number matched, and I felt a small flutter of interest. 3 numbers might be $50. The fourth number matched. My heart rate picked up. 4 numbers was unusual. I checked the ticket again to make sure I was reading it correctly. The 5th number matched. My hands started to shake. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my temples, behind my eyes. I checked the ticket again, checked the website, checked the ticket. 5 numbers. That was real money, the kind that could change things. The kind that could pay off my car, cover my rent for a year, maybe even let me finally go back to school. The 6th number matched. For 30 seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, at the ticket in my trembling hand, at the numbers that couldn't possibly be right but were. All 6 numbers. The jackpot. $80 million. My mind went completely blank, and then it flooded with thoughts so fast I couldn't process them. This wasn't real. This was a mistake. I'd misread something. I checked the date on the ticket, checked the date on the website, checked each number individually one by one, calling them out loud in my empty apartment like a prayer or an incantation. 4, 19, 23, 37, 41, 48. Each one matched. I checked again and again. I must have verified those numbers 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, convinced that at some point they'd stop matching, that reality would reassert itself and I'd find the error. But there was no error. I had just won $80 million. The logical thing would have been to scream, to cry, to call someone. But I'd spent so many years being quiet, being controlled, that even in this moment of absolute shock, I stayed silent. Instead, with fingers that barely cooperated, I typed into Google, "What to do if you win lottery." The first article that came up was from a financial advice website. The headline was in bold letters, "Don't tell anyone." I clicked on it and read, my eyes scanning faster and faster. Don't tell family. Don't tell friends. Don't post on social media. Get a lawyer immediately. Set up a trust. Protect your identity if your state allows it. The article went on to list horror story after horror story, lottery winners who'd been sued by family members, who'd been bankrupted by people they trusted, who'd been isolated, exploited, even killed for their winnings. And that's when the fear hit me. Not joy, not excitement, fear. I thought about my family. About 18 years of phone calls that only came when they needed something. About $2,000 I'd never see again. About 3 months of free childcare. About the flu I'd suffered through alone. About every birthday they'd forgotten, every crisis of mine they'd been too busy for, every time I'd needed them, and they'd found a reason to say no. And I thought about what would happen if they knew I had $80 million. The apartment was completely silent, except for the hum of my refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I sat there on my cheap couch in my tiny studio, holding a piece of paper worth more money than I could truly comprehend, and I felt the weight of a decision settling over me. I could tell them. I could call my mother right now, share the news, and within hours, I'd be surrounded by family, by celebration, by suddenly being the most important person in the family for the first time in my life. They'd love me then, wouldn't they? They'd finally see my value. Except I knew better. I'd been watching them for years now, studying their patterns, understanding their motivations. They didn't love me now when I had nothing. Why would money change that? It wouldn't make them love me. It would just give them a reason to pretend. I sat there for hours, not moving, barely breathing, just thinking. The money didn't make me imagine mansions or fancy cars or exotic vacations. It made me think about truth, about what was real and what was performance, about whether the relationships I'd spent my entire life maintaining out of obligation and hope were actually worth maintaining at all. For the first time in my life, I had power in this dynamic. Not because I'd finally learned to stand up for myself or set boundaries or any of the things self-help books recommended, but because I had something they wanted and they didn't know it. I could control the information. I could control the narrative. I could finally, after 36 years, run an experiment with real stakes. If I told them nothing, if I stayed exactly as I was, Grace, the helper. Grace, the reliable one. Grace, who lived in a tiny apartment and worked 2 jobs, would they treat me like family? Would they ever call just to check on me? Would they ever offer help without being asked? Would they ever see me as someone worth their time and care, not because of what I could give them, but because of who I was? I knew the answer. I'd always known the answer, but I needed to see it. I needed to prove it to myself, to have evidence so clear that even the part of me that still hoped, still wanted to believe in the possibility of their love, would finally have to accept reality. The decision crystallized slowly, like ice forming on a window. I wouldn't tell them. I wouldn't tell anyone. I would watch and wait and see what happened when Grace had nothing to offer but herself. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was verification. Money didn't change me. It sharpened me. The next 3 days were a blur of research. I called in sick to both jobs, something I never did, and sat at my laptop for hours on end, reading everything I could find about lottery winners. The stories were horrifying. A man in Florida who won $30 million and was bankrupt within 5 years, sued by his own brother. A woman in Ohio whose son tried to hire someone to kill her for the inheritance. A couple in Texas who lost everything to a financial advisor they'd trusted a childhood friend who'd stolen it all and disappeared. The pattern was consistent and terrifying. The people closest to you were often the most dangerous. Family members who felt entitled to your winnings. Friends who thought they deserved a piece because of past kindness. Strangers who crawled out of the woodwork with elaborate sob stories. The winners who survived were the ones who'd protected themselves early before anyone knew they had money to take. I searched for lottery winner protection attorney and found a list on the state government website of lawyers who specialized in this specific area. There were dozens of names, but I approached the research the way I approached everything, methodically, carefully. I read reviews, not just the glowing ones, but the complaints. I checked their licenses, verified their credentials, looked for any disciplinary actions or lawsuits. I ruled out anyone with flashy websites or aggressive marketing. If they were advertising heavily, I reasoned they were probably looking for clients who didn't know better. One name kept coming up in the more discreet forums and discussion boards. I found David Park. He didn't have a website, just a listing in the state bar directory. His credentials were impressive: 15 years as a lottery and estate attorney, but before that, 10 years as a criminal investigator. The few reviews I found were from people who spoke about his discretion, his thoroughness, his ability to protect his clients, not just legally, but strategically. I called his office from a burner phone I'd bought specifically for this purpose. A calm, professional voice answered, not a secretary, but David himself. I explained carefully that I'd recently come into significant money and needed legal protection. He didn't ask how much or push for details. He simply said, "I have an opening tomorrow at 2 o'clock if you'd like to meet in person. Consultations are confidential." His office was in a modest building downtown, not the gleaming high-rise I'd expected. The waiting room was empty, quiet, furnished with comfortable but not ostentatious furniture. When David came out to greet me, I was struck by how ordinary he looked: mid-50s, graying hair, a kind face that somehow also looked sharp, like he was already analyzing me. We sat in his office and he started with a question I hadn't expected. "Before we discuss the money, I want to ask you something. Do you trust your family to support you through this?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to give the automatic answer. Of course they're my family, but the words wouldn't come. I sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, and then to my horror, I started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears that I couldn't stop the release of 36 years of pretending everything was fine. David handed me a box of tissues and waited. When I could finally speak, I told him everything. About being the helper child, about the accident at 8 years old, about the 18 years since I'd left home where I'd given and never received anything in return. About the $2,000 I'd never see again, about the months of free childcare, about being sick and alone with no one willing to bring me groceries. He listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, his expression neutral but attentive. When I finished, he set down his pen and said, "I'm going to ask you something that might sound strange, but I need you to trust me. Do you want to know the truth about your family before you make any decisions about your assets?" I nodded, not sure what he meant. "Here's what I've learned in 15 years of doing this work," David said, leaning forward. "Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. Right now, you're in a unique position. You have $80 million and they don't know it. You have information they don't have, power they don't know you possess. The question is, what are you going to do with that position?" "I don't want revenge," I said quickly. "I just want to know if they'd ever help me without expecting something in return." David nodded slowly. "Then let's find out. Here's what I suggest before we do anything with the money, before we set up trusts or make any financial decisions. Try something simple. Ask them for help with a small amount. $500, $600. something that's meaningful but not catastrophic. Tell them you're short on rent, that you'll pay them back next week. See how they react." I stared at him. "You want me to ask my family for money when I have $80 million? "I want you to verify what you already suspect," he said gently. "You've given them money, time, energy, labor for 18 years. Have they ever given anything back? Not because they had to, not because it was reciprocal, but because they cared about your well-being. You think you know the answer, but you need to see it clearly. You need evidence, not just suspicion. This isn't about setting a trap. It's about verification." I thought about it, my mind racing. It felt manipulative, dishonest even. But then I thought about all the times they'd asked me for help, all the times I'd said yes while they'd said no. Was it really so wrong to want proof of what I already knew? "I've seen too many families destroyed by lottery money," David continued. "People who trusted the wrong relatives, who gave money to siblings or parents, who then demanded more, who found themselves isolated and broke because they wanted to believe their family loved them more than they loved the money. Better to know beforehand. Better to see their true priorities when the stakes are still small." The idea took shape slowly in my mind. $600. A reasonable amount to be short on rent, not so much that it would cause panic, but enough to show willingness. I'd ask each of them one by one, and I'd pay attention not just to whether they said yes or no, but to how they said it, to what excuses they gave, to whether they offered alternatives or simply dismissed my need. "This isn't revenge," David said again, as if reading my mind. "This is data collection. You're running an experiment to test a hypothesis. Your hypothesis is that your family values you for what you can provide, not for who you are. Am I right?" I nodded. "Then let's test it. Ask them for help. Document their responses, and then we'll know with certainty how to proceed with protecting your assets and your future." I sat in his office for another hour, working out the details. How to phrase the request, who to call, how to keep them from comparing notes so each response would be genuine. David explained that this wasn't unusual. He'd recommended similar tests to other clients, particularly those who'd grown up in families where money and love were entangled in unhealthy ways. When I finally left his office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. This wasn't about punishing them or proving them wrong. It was about understanding reality, about removing the fog of obligation and hope, and seeing what was actually there. I wasn't testing their money. I was testing their hearts. I spent the next 2 days preparing. David had been clear: if I wanted accurate data, I needed to control the variables. That meant calling everyone on the same day, close enough together that they wouldn't have time to compare notes, using the exact same script, so any variation in response would be about them, not about differences in how I asked. I made a list of the 7 people closest to me in my family. Jennifer, my older sister, 42 now, with 2 teenagers and a comfortable life in the suburbs. Robert, my oldest brother at 45, a middle manager at a tech company who was always talking about his investment portfolio. Marcus, 33, who still owed me $2,000 from 4 years ago. Sarah, my younger sister at 30, newly married with a baby on the way. My mother, who at 68 still worked part-time at a boutique she loved. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who'd always seemed warm at family gatherings. And my cousin Tom, 40, who I'd grown up with, and who'd always treated me kindly. 7 people. 7 chances for someone to show they cared. I chose a Thursday morning for the calls. Thursday seemed neutral, not the stress of Monday, not the relaxation of Friday. I'd start at 9 o'clock and call every 15 minutes. That would give me enough time to have the conversation, take notes, and compose myself before the next call, but not so much time that word could spread. I wrote out my script and practiced it until it sounded natural, unrehearsed. "Hey, it's Grace. I'm really sorry to bother you, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot. I'm short on rent this month, about $600, and I was wondering if you could help me out. I get paid next Friday, so I could pay you back then." Simple, specific, with a clear timeline for repayment. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would set off alarm bells. At 8:55, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone, a notebook, and a pen. My hands were shaking slightly. I told myself this was just information gathering, just data, but some part of me was still hoping, still wanting to be wrong about them. At 9 o'clock exactly, I called Jennifer. She answered on the third ring, her voice distracted. Grace. What's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something. I delivered my script, keeping my voice humble, even apologetic. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her calculating. $600, Grace. You know things are really tight for us right now. Brian's car just needed a new transmission, and Emma's orthodontist bills are killing us. I'm really sorry, but we just can't spare that kind of money right now. I understand, I said softly. No problem. I'll figure something out. Have you asked Mom? Jennifer said. Or maybe Marcus? I said I'd try them and ended the call. I wrote in my notebook, Jennifer. Immediate no. Mentioned car repair and orthodontist. Suggested asking others. No offer of partial help or alternatives. Call duration 2 minutes 40 seconds. At 9:15, I called Robert. He was at work but took the call. His response was almost identical in structure to Jennifer's, just different details. Grace, I wish I could help, but we just put a down payment on a new house. We're stretched thin. Maybe try asking Jennifer. She's usually good with money stuff. I noted Robert. Immediate no. House down payment. Redirected to Jennifer. No hesitation or consideration. Call duration 2 minutes 10 seconds. 9:30 was Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on me, asking for money from the brother who'd never repaid what he owed. His excuse was student loans and credit card debt. You know how it is, Grace. I'm barely keeping my head above water. I didn't remind him about the $2,000. I just thanked him and hung up. Sarah at 9:45 sounded genuinely sympathetic. Oh, Grace, that's awful. I'm so sorry, but with the baby coming, we're saving every penny for the nursery and medical bills. Have you thought about asking your landlord for an extension? At least she offered an alternative solution, even if it wasn't helpful. I noted that difference. My mother at 10 o'clock was perhaps the most painful. Gracie, honey, I'm working part-time now. I don't have that kind of money just sitting around. You've always been so good at managing. I'm sure you'll work something out. You always do. The assumption that I'd work it out, because I always had, because I was Grace, the reliable one, who never really needed help. Aunt Linda at 10:15 said she'd love to help, but she was planning a cruise next month and couldn't touch her vacation savings. You understand, right? I've been looking forward to this for so long. By the time I called Tom at 10:30, I already knew what would happen. Sure enough, he explained that he'd just bought a boat and his account was depleted. Bad timing, cuz. Any other month, maybe. I sat at my kitchen table looking at my notes. 7 calls. 7 rejections. The excuses varied. Car repairs, house down payments, student loans, baby expenses, vacation savings, boat purchases. But the underlying message was identical. They couldn't help. They were all struggling, all stretched thin, all facing their own financial pressures. What struck me wasn't the anger or hurt I'd expected to feel. It was the recognition. I'd heard all this before, just from different angles. When I'd asked to join the school play as a child, we're all making sacrifices, Grace. When I'd wanted to try out for soccer, everyone has responsibilities, not just you. The words changed, but the meaning stayed the same. Their needs were legitimate and mine were negotiable. Not one of them had said, "Let me check my bank account." Not one had offered $50 or $100 or any amount. Not one had asked detailed questions about my situation or offered to help me problem solve. They'd all assumed I'd figure it out because I always did, because Grace was capable and independent and didn't really need anyone. I looked at my notebook at the neat columns of data I'd collected. Names, excuses, tone, duration. Documented evidence of what I'd known but had never wanted to admit. Their excuses sounded familiar. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that last call, staring at the notes I'd taken. The page was filled with my handwriting, neat columns documenting each conversation. Under reason given, I'd recorded all their excuses: car transmission, new house down payment, student loans, baby expenses, cruise vacation, boat purchase, each one different in the specifics. But when I read them all together, a picture emerged that was impossible to ignore. They'd all said they were sorry. Every single one of them had used that word, sometimes multiple times. "I'm so sorry, Grace. I wish I could help. I'm really sorry. Sorry, bad timing." The apologies flowed easily, reflexively, the way people say bless you after a sneeze, automatic words that cost nothing and meant even less. What they hadn't said was equally revealing. Not one had asked how I'd gotten into this situation. Not one had questioned why I, who'd always been so financially responsible, suddenly couldn't make rent. Not one had offered to help me talk to my landlord, or suggested I reach out to local assistance programs, or offered to loan me a smaller amount if $600 was too much. The help they declined to give wasn't just financial. It was any help at all. Jennifer's words echoed in my mind, "You know we're tight this month." But I didn't know that. In fact, I had evidence to the contrary. Just last month, she'd posted photos of her family's weekend at an indoor water park resort. Rooms at those places started at $200 a night. But apparently a transmission repair had wiped out any ability to help her sister with rent. Marcus, who owed me $2,000 he'd never mentioned repaying, had cited credit card debt and student loans. The same Marcus who'd recently posted about his new gaming computer setup, which I knew from my retail days, cost at least $1,500. But $600 for his sister was impossible. Sarah's excuse had been baby expenses, which I understood were real and significant. But she and her husband both had good jobs, and she'd just shown me photos of the designer nursery furniture they'd bought. I wasn't judging their choices. It was their money after all, but it revealed their priorities clearly. The baby's aesthetically perfect room was essential. Helping me was not. What troubled me most, though, wasn't the refusals themselves. It was something else I'd noticed in several of the conversations, a theme that emerged so naturally, they probably didn't even realize they were doing it. My mother had said it first, "You've always been so good at managing. I'm sure you'll work something out. You always do." Then Tom had echoed it almost word for word. "You've always been so good at figuring things out. I'm sure you'll be fine." Even Jennifer had implied it when she'd suggested I ask others, as if coordinating my own rescue was just another task I'd competently handle. They were using my strength against me. For years, I'd taken pride in my independence and my ability to survive without help. I'd worked multiple jobs, paid my own bills, solved my own problems. I'd thought I was demonstrating resilience, self-sufficiency, competence. But what I'd actually been doing was training them to see me as someone who didn't need help. And now, when I actually asked for it, they fell back on the image I'd inadvertently created. Grace doesn't really need us. Grace always figures it out. Grace is strong. It was a perfect defense mechanism. By framing me as exceptionally capable, they could refuse to help without feeling guilty. I wasn't a person in need. I was Grace who'd somehow manage because that's what Grace does. My competence had become their excuse. I realized sitting there with my notes that this went deeper than just these 7 phone calls. This was the culmination of a lifetime pattern. When I was a child, they'd needed me to be the responsible one, the helper, the one who didn't require attention. So they'd praised that quality in me, reinforced it, until I'd internalized it as my identity. And now, decades later, that same quality they'd cultivated was the justification for abandoning me when I needed support. They hadn't just refused to help me. They'd made my self-reliance, my survival skills, my independence, all things I'd developed because they'd never been there for me, into proof that they didn't need to be there for me now. It was circular logic, self-reinforcing, and absolutely brilliant in its cruelty. The pattern was so clear now. I'd given Marcus $2,000 when he needed a car. Jennifer had needed childcare, and I'd provided months of it for free. Robert had needed help moving, and I'd shown up with a truck. Sarah had needed meals when her husband was sick, and I'd cooked for them for a week. My mother had needed someone to handle her finances when she was overwhelmed, and I'd spent hours organizing her bills and setting up automatic payments. But when I needed $600, they all had reasons why they couldn't. The word that kept surfacing in my mind was comfortable. They'd become comfortable with this dynamic. Comfortable asking me for help. Comfortable never reciprocating. Comfortable with a family structure where I existed at the bottom, where my resources and time and energy flowed upward to them, but never back down to me. They'd become so comfortable with it that they genuinely didn't see anything wrong with it. And maybe that was the most damning realization of all. This wasn't malicious. They weren't evil people who'd conspired to use me. They were simply people who'd accepted a hierarchy that benefited them and never questioned it. They took what I gave because I kept giving it. They didn't help because they'd never had to. I'd made it easy for them to be selfish by always being selfless. I thought about David's words. Money doesn't change people, it reveals them. He'd been right. This test hadn't created their selfishness. It had simply made it visible, documented. It proved what I'd known in my gut, but had never wanted to accept. I looked at my phone at the list of recent calls. 7 conversations, 7 rejections, 7 variations on the same theme. We can't help you, but we're sure you'll be fine without us. Part of me wanted to stop there to accept the data and move forward with David's help in protecting my lottery winnings from these people. But there was something else I needed to do first, a compulsion I couldn't quite name. I needed to see how they were really doing, these people who were all too broke to spare $600. Then I opened Facebook. I didn't have to look very hard. Facebook did the work for me. The first post appeared 3 days after my phone calls. It was from Robert, my oldest brother, who'd told me he couldn't help because of the down payment on a new house. The photo showed him and his wife at an upscale steakhouse I recognized, the kind where entrees started at $60. They were holding champagne glasses, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Celebrating 20 years with my beautiful wife. Here's to many more." I stared at the photo for a long time. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was doing math. 2 people, expensive steakhouse champagne, probably appetizers and dessert. Conservative estimate, $300 for one dinner, half of what I'd asked to borrow. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I just took a screenshot and added it to a folder on my laptop I'd titled Documentation. 2 days later, Sarah posted a photo of herself in front of a mirror, showing off a designer diaper bag. I recognized the brand from my retail days. That particular bag retailed for $850. Her caption, "Treating myself before baby arrives. I deserve this." Several family members had commented with hearts and congratulations. My mother had written, "You do deserve it, sweetheart." I took another screenshot. Sarah, who couldn't spare $600 for her sister's rent because of baby expenses, had just spent $850 on a bag to carry diapers. The following week, Jennifer posted a carousel of photos from a family vacation. Beach resort palm trees, her kids in the pool sunset dinners. The caption read, "Much needed family time, so grateful for these moments." I recognized the resort from the distinctive architecture. I'd seen ads for it. Out of curiosity, I opened a new browser window and looked up their rates. $800 per night, 3-night minimum. Jennifer had stayed for 4 nights based on the photo timestamps. That was $3,200, not counting food activities or travel. Jennifer, who was tight this month because of a car transmission and orthodontist bills, had just spent over $3,000 on a beach vacation. I didn't feel the hot rush of anger I'd expected. Instead, I felt something colder, more analytical. I was collecting data, and the data was remarkably consistent. I began checking Facebook daily, not obsessively, just as part of my morning routine with coffee. The evidence accumulated steadily. Marcus posted photos of his new home theater system, massive screens, surround sound speakers, gaming console, the works. I'd worked in electronics retail long enough to price that setup. Conservative estimate, $5,000. Marcus, who owed me $2,000 from 4 years ago and couldn't help with $600 now because of credit card debt, had just dropped $5,000 on entertainment equipment. Aunt Linda checked in at a luxury spa 2 hours north of the city. I looked it up. Weekend packages started at $1,200. Linda, who couldn't touch her vacation savings because she was planning a cruise, had apparently found room in her budget for a spa weekend that cost twice what I'd asked for. Tom posted photos of his new boat, not the boat he'd mentioned when he turned me down, but apparently a second boat, a smaller one for fishing. The caption, "Couldn't resist. You only live once, right?" My mother posted about a shopping trip with her boutique colleagues showing off several bags from high-end stores. "Retail therapy is the best therapy," she'd written. I documented everything. Screenshots, dates, estimates of costs. I created a spreadsheet because that's who I am. Organized, methodical, thorough. I added up the totals. In the 2 weeks since they'd all told me they couldn't afford to help my family, had collectively spent at least $15,000 on non-essential purchases and experiences. $15,000. I'd asked for $600. The clarity that came wasn't sudden. It accumulated with each screenshot, each calculation, each new post showing another purchase they could afford while I supposedly couldn't be helped. This wasn't about them having hard months or unexpected expenses. This was about choice. They'd chosen the steakhouse dinner, the designer diaper bag, the beach resort, the home theater, the spa weekend, the boat, the shopping spree. They'd chosen all of that, and they'd chosen not to help me. What struck me most was the ease of it all. The casualness. Treating myself. You only live once. Much needed family time. They weren't agonizing over these purchases. They weren't sacrificing or struggling. They were living comfortably, spending freely, enjoying their lives. And when I'd asked for help, they'd presented themselves as people who were stretched thin, barely making it, unable to spare even a small amount. They'd lied. Not explicitly, they probably even believed their own excuses in the moment. But the evidence proved the truth. They'd had the money. They'd chosen to spend it on themselves rather than help me. I thought about all the times I'd helped them over the years. The $2,000 Marcus never repaid. The months of free childcare for Jennifer. The help moving the meals, delivered the financial advice, given the time and energy and resources I'd poured into these relationships. I'd done all of that while working 2 jobs, while living in a studio apartment, while my back ached from old injuries and new strain. I'd done it while struggling, while stretching my own budget to breaking, while going without. And they couldn't help me with $600 because they needed that money for champagne dinners and designer bags and beach resorts and home theaters and spa weekends. The child who was never chosen had become the adult who wasn't worth $600. Not because they didn't have it, but because I didn't matter enough for them to choose me over their own wants. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet of my apartment. I wasn't crying. I wasn't raging. I was simply seeing clearly for the first time in my life. The hope I'd carried for 36 years. The hope that maybe they loved me. Maybe they'd be there if I really needed them. Maybe family meant something more than obligation and convenience, that hope was gone. That's when I stopped hoping. After 2 weeks of watching my family's lives unfold on Facebook, after documenting their expensive vacations and purchases, after accepting that hope was a luxury I could no longer afford, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I was cleaning out my closet. It wasn't purposeful exactly. I just needed to do something with my hands, something physical and mindless to quiet the thoughts spinning in my head. I pulled out boxes I hadn't opened since I'd moved into this apartment 7 years ago. Old clothes I'd meant to donate, books from high school, random keepsakes I'd saved for reasons I could no longer remember. In the back corner, I found a shoebox filled with old greeting cards. Birthday cards from coworkers who'd long since moved on to other jobs. Thank you notes from people whose names I barely recognized. And tucked near the bottom, a Christmas card with a simple winter scene on the front. Nothing religious, just snow-covered trees, and a generic, season's greetings. I opened it. The handwriting was neat, careful the script of someone who'd learned English as a second language and took pride in forming each letter correctly. It read, "Wishing you health and happiness, Grace. You may not remember me, but I will always remember you. May life bring you the peace you deserve. Margaret Chen." The postmark was 15 years old. I turned the card over in my hands, searching my memory for any Margaret Chen. The name meant nothing to me. I had no mental image to attach to it, no context. But something about the message struck me. You may not remember me, but I will always remember you. That was a specific kind of statement. Not nice to hear from you or hope you're well. This person knew me or had known me in a way that mattered. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the crushing weight of 7 rejections and 2 weeks of documented proof that my family didn't care. Maybe it was the desperate hope that somewhere someone might see me as more than a convenient source of labor and loans. Maybe I was just curious about why a stranger would send such a heartfelt message. I found her number through online directory assistance. There were 3 Margaret Chens in the area, but only one was the right age range based on the handwriting. I stared at the number on my phone screen for a long time before I pressed call. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was feminine, older, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. "Hi, is this Margaret Chen?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes. Who is this?" I took a breath. "This is going to sound strange, but my name is Grace Powell. I found a Christmas card you sent me about 15 years ago, and I—" "Grace!" The word came out sharp, almost shocked. Then silence. I could hear breathing on the other end, quick and shallow. "Grace Powell, is it really you?" "Yes," I said, confused by the intensity of her reaction. "I'm sorry, I don't think I remember—" "Your voice," she interrupted. "You sound— Of course you sound different. You were 8 years old." Another pause. "You're Grace Powell. You had an accident. The stairs." My heart started pounding. "How do you know about that?" "I was your nurse," she said quietly. "After the surgery. I took care of you for 4 months. The hospital, the endless months of pain and recovery. I had vague memories of nurses' kind faces that blurred together in my morphine-hazed recollection. But I couldn't pull out a specific person named Margaret. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't really remember much from that time." "I know," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "You were so young, and you were in so much pain. I wouldn't expect you to remember. But I remember you, Grace. I've thought about you so many times over the years." She paused. "Why are you calling? Is everything all right? Are you safe?" The concern in her voice was so immediate, so genuine, that I felt something break loose in my chest. This woman, who I didn't remember, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 decades, was asking if I was safe. I almost hung up. Almost decided this was too strange, too much. But something in her voice, the care, the worry, the instant readiness to help, made me push forward. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm actually calling because I'm in a bit of a difficult situation. I'm short on rent this month, about $600, and I was wondering if you might be able to help. I can pay you back next week when I get my paycheck." I expected questions. I expected hesitation. I expected some version of what I'd heard 7 times already. Instead, Margaret said immediately, "Yes, of course. I'll transfer the money right now. What's your account number?" I sat there stunned. You don't want to know why I need it, or when exactly I can pay you back?" "Grace," she said gently, "if you're asking me for help, you need help. That's all I need to know." I could hear movement on her end, the sound of a keyboard. "What's your account information?" I gave her the details, my voice shaking. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a notification. The transfer had gone through, not just $600, $800. I sent a little extra, Margaret said. In case there are other expenses. Please don't worry about paying it back quickly. Take your time. Take care of yourself. I couldn't speak. Tears were running down my face, silent and unstoppable. This woman who I didn't remember, who had no obligation to me, who I'd cold called out of nowhere, had just helped me without a single question or condition. Thank you, I finally managed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Margaret replied. Her voice was thick with emotion. Grace, can I ask you something? Are you all right? Really all right? Your family, are they taking care of you? The question was so specific, so pointed, that it made me pause. Why do you ask that? She was quiet for a moment. Because I worried about you. After you left the hospital. I worried for a long time. Another pause. You don't remember me, do you? That's okay. I never forgot you. Why? I asked. Why did you remember me? Because of what I saw, she said softly. Because of what happened. Because I tried to help you and I failed. Her voice broke. I've carried that failure for 28 years, Grace. When I saw your name on my caller ID, I thought, I don't know what I thought. Maybe that I was finally getting a chance to do what I should have done back then. What do you mean? I asked. What did you see? We should talk, Margaret said. Not on the phone. Can I take you to lunch tomorrow if you're free? I agreed. We made plans. When I hung up, I sat on my closet floor surrounded by old boxes and forgotten memories holding that 15-year-old Christmas card. She didn't know I was rich. She knew I mattered. The next day, I went to Margaret's house. I'd insisted on meeting her in person to return the money plus extra as a thank you. I'd withdrawn $1,000 in cash. The money felt more real, more meaningful than a digital transfer. I wanted her to understand how much her help had meant. She lived in a modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and kept their lawns neat. When she opened the door, I got my first clear look at her. She was in her early 60s, Chinese-American, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and silver threading through her dark hair. She was shorter than me, maybe 5'2", but there was a steadiness about her that made her presence feel larger. Grace, she said softly, and just stood there looking at me. Not in a creepy way, but like she was seeing someone she'd thought about for a very long time. Come in, please. Her home was warm and welcoming, filled with plants and photographs. She offered me tea, and we sat in her living room. I tried to hand her the envelope with the money, but she waved it away. Later, she said. First, I need to ask you something. She leaned forward slightly. You have a small scar behind your right ear, don't you? I felt my hand instinctively move to touch the spot she'd mentioned. There was a scar there, a tiny one I barely thought about. Yes. How did you know that? Because I was there when they put in the central line, Margaret said. You were 8 years old and you'd just come out of a 4-hour spinal surgery. I was the nurse who monitored you for the first 72 hours post-op. I checked that IV site every 4 hours for 3 days straight. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this woman in front of me with the blurry memories of that hospital stay. I remembered pain mostly, white ceilings, the smell of antiseptic, kind voices but no faces I could pull into focus. I'm sorry, I said. I remember being in the hospital, but I don't remember specific people. I was so out of it with the pain medication. I know, Margaret said gently. I didn't expect you to remember me, but I remembered you. I recognized you from your name, not your voice. When you called yesterday and said Grace Powell, I knew exactly who you were. I've been waiting 28 years to hear that name again. Something in her tone made my skin prickle. Why? What happened? Margaret stood up and walked to a bookshelf. She pulled out a manila folder worn at the edges and came back to sit beside me. She didn't open it yet. She just held it in her lap. Grace, do you remember how you fell down those stairs? The question was so direct, so specific that I felt my throat tighten. I remember being at the top. I remember falling. Everyone said I was running and tripped. That's what your family said, Margaret agreed. But that's not what the evidence showed. She opened the folder. Inside were medical photographs, nursing notes in careful handwriting, and official-looking forms with hospital letterhead. These are photos of your injuries from the day you came in. Look at the bruising pattern on your back. She showed me a photograph of a child's back. My back, I realized with a jolt, covered in purple and black bruises. Margaret pointed to a specific area. This bruising here between your shoulder blades, that's not consistent with a tumbling fall. When someone falls downstairs, they hit multiple surfaces at different angles. You get bruising that's scattered irregular. She traced the pattern in the photo. This is concentrated force from a single direction. This is what happens when someone is pushed hard enough to send them flying forward. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the photo at the evidence of violence on my 8-year-old body. I noticed it immediately, Margaret continued. I documented it. I took extra photos. I wrote detailed notes. She showed me pages of her handwriting, clinical observations mixed with personal concerns. I reported it to my supervisor. I said I believed this was not an accidental fall, that we needed to contact Child Protective Services. What happened? I whispered. Your parents found out somehow that I'd raised concerns. Within 24 hours, they had lawyers at the hospital. Expensive lawyers who threatened to sue the hospital for defamation for false accusations that could destroy their reputation. They found another doctor, someone who'd gone to school with your father, who said the bruising could absolutely be from an accidental fall if the child had hit the railing in a particular way. Margaret's hands were shaking slightly as she turned the pages. CPS came to investigate. I told them everything I'd observed, but your family was very convincing. Well-dressed, educated, clearly devastated by what had happened to their daughter. Your older sister was there crying, saying it was her fault for not watching you more carefully, for not stopping you from running. She looked at me. And you, Grace. You were 8 years old, in terrible pain, confused and scared. When they asked if someone pushed you, you said no. You said you fell. I remembered that moment now, suddenly and vividly. The CPS worker with the clipboard. My parents in the room. Jennifer crying. The overwhelming feeling that saying the truth would somehow make everything worse, that it would hurt more than my broken spine already did. Without physical evidence beyond what could be explained away, and without your testimony, CPS closed the case, Margaret said. And I was fired 3 weeks later. Officially for budget cuts, but we both knew why. I'd made trouble for a VIP family. I'd questioned their story. The hospital chose their money and reputation over the truth. She pulled out one more document, a letter on official hospital stationery. I fought it. I tried to appeal. I even contacted the state nursing board, tried to make noise about what I'd witnessed. But your family's lawyers made sure I never worked in a hospital in this state again. They destroyed my career. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I failed you, Grace. I saw what happened, and I couldn't protect you. You tried, I said, my own voice breaking. You were the only one who tried. I've carried that failure for 28 years, Margaret said. I kept these records. I couldn't let them go. They were proof of what I knew, even if no one would listen. And sometimes late at night I'd think about you. I'd wonder if you were okay, if you were safe, if you even survived growing up in that family. She reached out and took my hand. When I heard your voice yesterday asking for money, I knew this was my chance. I couldn't save you then, but I could help you now. This time I won't fail you. I looked down at the folder full of evidence, 28-year-old proof that someone had tried to kill me and gotten away with it. The bruise patterns that didn't match the story. The nursing notes that questioned the official narrative. The documentation of a cover-up by people with money and influence. Someone tried to kill me once. And they got away with it. 3 weeks after Margaret showed me the evidence of what really happened when I was 8 years old, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. Jennifer. My older sister, who couldn't spare $600, but could afford a $3,200 beach vacation. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won out. I wanted to know why she was calling. In the 18 years since I'd left home, Jennifer had never called me just to chat. She called when she needed something, and even then, not always herself. Sometimes she'd have Mom call on her behalf. "Grace? Hi?" Her voice was bright, almost aggressively cheerful. "How are you? I feel like we haven't talked in forever." We'd talked 3 weeks ago when she'd turned down my request for rent money, but I didn't mention that. "I'm fine," I said neutrally. "What's up?" "Well, I was thinking," Jennifer said, and I could hear the careful construction in her tone. "We should have a family gathering this weekend. Nothing fancy, just everyone getting together for lunch. You should come." I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it for a second, as if the device itself might explain this bizarre behavior. A family gathering that I was explicitly invited to. That wasn't how our family worked. They had gatherings, certainly holidays, birthdays, graduations, and I was expected to show up and help with food prep and cleanup. But no one called to personally invite me, and certainly not Jennifer. "That's kind of sudden," I said carefully. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion." Jennifer's laugh sounded forced. "We just haven't all been together in a while, and I thought it would be nice. You know, family time. We miss you. We miss you." The words were so unexpected, so contrary to every pattern of the last 18 years that I actually felt a laugh bubble up in my throat. I swallowed it. "Sure," I said. "I can probably make it. Where and when?" She gave me the details Sunday at Mom's house 1 o'clock, and then she said almost too casually, "Oh, by the way, how are you doing? Everything okay with you? I heard you changed your phone number or something." I definitely had not changed my phone number. I'd had the same number for 7 years. "No," I said. "Same number I've always had." "Oh," Jennifer said. "Weird." I thought, well, never mind. "So everything's good with you?" "Work going well." This was fishing. This was Jennifer trying to extract information without asking directly. I'd watched her do this to other people for years, the casual questions that weren't casual at all, the seemingly random inquiries designed to build a picture without revealing why she wanted it. "Work's fine," I said, keeping my voice light and uninterested. "That's good? That's good." Another pause. "Marcus mentioned he saw you last week. Said you were in the Riverside area. That's kind of far from your usual spots." Riverside was the expensive part of town about 20 minutes from my old neighborhood. And yes, I had been there because I'd moved into a better apartment in that area 2 weeks ago. Nothing extravagant. I was being very careful not to draw too much attention, but it was a significant upgrade from my studio. 1 bedroom, a real kitchen, a parking space in a building that had security and working elevators. Marcus seeing me there wasn't coincidence. He lived on the other side of town. He'd been looking for me, or at minimum had been told to report back if he spotted me anywhere unusual. They were watching me. "Oh yeah," I said vaguely. "I was meeting a friend for coffee." "Nice, nice." Jennifer's voice had that tight quality of someone trying to sound casual while being anything but. "You know, I also heard someone mentioned they thought they saw you driving a different car. Not your old Honda." My 15-year-old Honda had finally given up 3 weeks ago, the transmission failing in a way that would have cost more to fix than the car was worth. I'd bought a replacement, a 6-year-old Toyota, nothing flashy, the kind of reliable used car a retail worker who'd gotten a small promotion might reasonably afford. But it was noticeably newer and in better condition than what I'd been driving. "Yeah, the Honda died," I said. "I got something more reliable, used but newer." "Good for you," Jennifer said with an enthusiasm that sounded rehearsed. "That's great, Grace, really great. So things are going well then." "Things are fine," I said. "Same as always." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her trying to decide how to dig deeper without being obvious. Finally, she said, "Well, I'm glad. We really should catch up more. We're family, you know. We should be there for each other." We should be there for each other. from the woman who'd refused me $600 3 weeks ago while planning a beach vacation. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. "Sure," I said. "See you Sunday." After I hung up, I sat on my new couch in my new apartment and thought about what had just happened. Jennifer's call wasn't about family bonding or missing me. It was reconnaissance. They'd noticed changes, the new car, the new neighborhood, maybe other things I hadn't even realized were visible. And now they were trying to figure out what had changed in my life. I thought about my options. I could continue keeping everything secret, maintaining my cover story of a small promotion and careful budgeting. Or I could let them know I had money, watch what they did with that information, and continue gathering data about who they really were. David had been preparing the legal structures to protect the lottery winnings trusts, anonymity provisions, everything designed to ensure that even if my family knew I was wealthy, they couldn't access the money without my permission. Margaret had become something between a friend and a guardian, checking in on me regularly, offering advice not just about the money, but about protecting myself emotionally from people who'd already hurt me once. I'd been working with both of them on what David called strategic revelation, deciding when and how to let my family know about the lottery, if at all. We'd discussed the risks, the potential outcomes, the ways they might respond. Sunday's gathering, I realized, might be the perfect opportunity. Not to tell them everything, but to confirm their suspicions just enough to see what they'd do. To watch how they behaved when they thought I had resources they wanted. I'd agreed to attend the gathering and I would go, not because I trusted them or wanted their company, but because I needed to see the next move in this game they didn't know they were playing. They sensed something. They just didn't know what. Sunday arrived. I dressed carefully, nice but not too nice, the kind of outfit I might wear if I'd gotten a modest promotion. I drove my newer but not new Toyota to my mother's house, the same house I'd grown up in, and parked on the street. The gathering was already in full swing when I arrived. I could hear voices from the backyard, laughter, the sound of children playing. For a moment, standing on the front porch, I considered turning around and leaving. But I'd come this far. I needed to see this through. My mother answered the door with a surprised smile. "Grace, you made it. Come in, come in. Everyone's out back." Everyone meant the usual suspects. Jennifer and her husband and kids, Robert and his wife Marcus, and his girlfriend Sarah, and her husband Aunt Linda, cousin Tom. The whole cast of characters who'd turned me down 3 weeks ago. I accepted a glass of lemonade and made small talk, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. "Grace," Jennifer said, approaching me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm so glad you could come. You look good. Different somehow." She tilted her head, studying me. "Did you buy a new car? I could have sworn I saw you driving something different the other day." The table had gone quieter. People were listening. "Yeah," I said simply. "My Honda finally died. Got a replacement." "Nice," Marcus chimed in, appearing at Jennifer's elbow like they'd choreographed this. "And you moved right. My buddy Dave lives in that building downtown Riverside Commons, said he saw you in the elevator. That place is nice. Rent's like $2,500 a month, though." They weren't being subtle anymore. They were cornering me in front of the whole family, demanding an explanation for how someone who worked retail and waited tables could suddenly afford a better car and a nicer apartment. I could have lied, could have stuck to the promotion story, claimed I'd been saving, made up a roommate. But I was tired of lying. And more than that, I wanted to see what happened when I told the truth. I set down my lemonade. "I won some money," I said, "in the lottery." For exactly 3 seconds, the backyard was completely silent. Even the kids stopped playing. Then it exploded. "Oh my God!" Sarah shrieked, rushing over to hug me. "Grace, that's amazing! Why didn't you tell us?" My mother said, her hand flying to her chest. "How much?" Robert asked, always the practical one. "When did this happen?" Aunt Linda wanted to know. They surrounded me, hugging, congratulating, asking questions all at once. The warmth was overwhelming. Hands patting my shoulders, voices expressing joy and excitement. Jennifer even had tears in her eyes as she pulled me into an embrace. "I'm so happy for you," she whispered in my ear. This is wonderful. We should celebrate. I stood in the center of it all and felt nothing. Or rather, I felt like a scientist observing an experiment. These were the same people who 3 weeks ago had told me they couldn't help with $600. The same people who'd spent $15,000 on luxuries in the 2 weeks after turning me down. The same people who'd never called to check on me, never offered help, never treated me as anything more than a convenient resource. And now, because I had money, I was suddenly worth celebrating. I watched Jennifer's face carefully. She was smiling, crying, saying all the right things. But there was something else in her expression, something that didn't quite fit with simple joy. Her eyes kept darting to my face, searching, and her questions weren't just about the money. "This is such good news," she said, still holding my hands. "You deserve this, Grace. You really do." Then more quietly, "Do you remember much from when you were little? I was thinking about that the other day, about how much you've been through." The question was so random, so out of place, that I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know," Jennifer said, her laugh a little too bright. "Just childhood stuff. That accident you had. I was wondering if you remember much about the hospital and everything." "Some," I said carefully. "Why?" "No reason," she said quickly. "Just curious. Have you been in touch with anyone from back then? Any old doctors or nurses or anything?" My heart started beating faster. This wasn't about the money. This was about something else. "Why would I be in touch with hospital staff from 28 years ago?" I asked. "You wouldn't," Jennifer said, laughing again, that same false brightness. "I'm just being weird. Ignore me. I'm just so excited for you." She squeezed my hands. "We should spend more time together, you and me. Reconnect, you know. Sisters should be close." I looked at her, really looked at her. At 42, Jennifer was still beautiful, still poised, still the golden child who could do no wrong. But right now, underneath the congratulations and the joy, I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Fear. She was afraid. Not of losing access to money, though I'm sure that was part of it. She was afraid of something specific, something from the past. She was afraid I remembered. Or afraid I'd found out. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of questions and suggestions. Robert wanted to introduce me to his financial advisor. Marcus mentioned some investment opportunities he'd heard about. Sarah suggested I should help her and her husband with their down payment on a house. My mother thought I should contribute to the family reunion fund. They were already planning how to spend money that wasn't theirs. But I kept watching Jennifer. She stayed close to me all afternoon, asking seemingly random questions. Did I still see any childhood friends? Had I been back to our old neighborhood? Had anyone reached out to me recently? She was mapping my connections, trying to figure out who I'd been talking to, what I might know. I didn't mention Margaret. I didn't mention the folder of medical records and photographs. I didn't mention that I knew the truth about what happened on those stairs 28 years ago. But I could see in Jennifer's eyes that she suspected something had changed, something beyond just the money. And she was trying to figure out what it was before it became a problem. That's when they started planning. The change in Jennifer started the very next day. She called me Monday morning while I was getting ready for work. "Grace, good morning. I was just thinking about you and wanted to say hi. How are you feeling after yesterday?" I stared at my phone in confusion. Jennifer never called to say hi. She called when she needed something. But her voice was warm, friendly, genuinely interested in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm fine," I said cautiously. "Good, good. Listen, I was thinking we should have dinner this week. Just you and me. There's this great Italian place near you, my treat. What do you say?" By Thursday, we'd had 2 dinners together. Jennifer insisted on paying for both despite my offers. She asked about my life, my work, my apartment. She told me stories about her kids, about struggles in her marriage, about feeling disconnected from the family. She was opening up to me in ways she never had before. "I know I haven't been the best sister," she said over our second dinner, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I want to change that. I want us to be close. Real sisters, you know? The calls became daily, sometimes twice a day. Good morning texts. How are you doing? Thinking of you. Little gifts started arriving, a candle she thought I'd like, a book she'd enjoyed, a scarf in my favorite color. Nothing expensive, just thoughtful. Personal. Our family needs healing, Jennifer said during one of our phone calls. We've all been so disconnected, so caught up in our own lives. Your good fortune, it's like a wake-up call, you know. A reminder that we need to appreciate each other, be there for each other. Part of me, a large part of me, wanted desperately to believe this was real. This was what I'd wanted my entire life. A sister who called just to check on me. Someone who wanted to spend time with me not because they needed something, but because they valued me. Family that felt like family. But David's words kept echoing in my mind from our last meeting. Watch what people do when they think you have something they want. 2 weeks after the family gathering, Jennifer invited me to her house for dinner. Just the two of us. Her husband had taken the kids to his parents for the weekend. She cooked something elaborate and thoughtful and opened a bottle of wine. We ate and talked, the conversation flowing more easily than it ever had. Jennifer poured herself a second glass of wine, then a third. Her cheeks flushed. Her words started to come a little slower, a little more careful. "Grace," she said suddenly, setting down her glass. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've carried for a long time." I felt my whole body tense. "Okay." She looked down at her plate, tears starting to form in her eyes. "The accident. When you were 8. When you fell down the stairs." She wiped at her eyes. "I've never forgiven myself for that." My heart was pounding. "What do you mean?" "I should have been watching you more carefully," she said, her voice breaking. "I was supposed to be the responsible older sister and I wasn't paying attention. I should have stopped you from running. I should have been there. I should have..." She trailed off, crying harder now. I sat frozen. This wasn't quite a confession. She wasn't saying she pushed me, but she was saying something, taking some kind of responsibility, showing some kind of remorse. "You were 16, I said quietly. "It wasn't your job to watch me every second." "But I felt like it was," Jennifer said. "And when it happened, when you fell, I was so scared. Scared that I'd be blamed, that everyone would hate me, that I'd lose everything." She looked up at me, her eyes red. "I've carried that guilt my whole life, Grace. Every time I look at you, I remember. And I'm so, so sorry." She reached across the table and grabbed my hands, holding them tight. "I know I can't change the past. I know I can't take back what happened. But I want to be better now. I want to be the sister you deserved back then. Please, Grace. Let me try." I felt my own eyes starting to burn with tears. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? An acknowledgement of harm, an apology, a desire to make things right. "Okay," I whispered. Jennifer pulled me into a hug and we both cried. When I left that night, I felt lighter somehow, like maybe there was hope for us after all. The next morning, I called David and told him everything that had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Grace, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What Jennifer did last night wasn't a confession. It was a performance." "She was crying," I protested. "She was drunk. It was real emotion." "I'm sure it was," David said. "But think about what she actually said. She didn't say she pushed you. She didn't admit to doing anything wrong. She said she felt guilty for not watching you carefully enough. That's not an admission of culpability. It's a way of framing herself as someone who cares, who's been suffering, who deserves sympathy." I sat down on my couch, feeling sick. "She's building a narrative," David continued. "If she makes you feel like she's already apologized for the past, like she's suffered enough, like she's trying to make amends, then you'll feel obligated to forgive her. And when someone feels forgiven, they feel entitled to ask for things. This is manipulation 101, Grace. She's setting the stage." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. For whatever she's planning to ask you for next, David said. Money, probably, but maybe something else, too. Watch her closely. See what comes after this emotional reconciliation. I guarantee you this wasn't about healing. This was about positioning herself for something. I thought about Jennifer's tears, her trembling hands, her heartfelt apology. I thought about how much I'd wanted it to be real, how ready I'd been to believe in the possibility of change. She wasn't confessing. She was manipulating. After my conversation with David about Jennifer's emotional manipulation, I expected him to tell me to be careful, to keep my distance, to protect my assets. Instead, he said something that surprised me. I think we need to know more about Jennifer's current situation, he said. Her behavior, the sudden warmth, the calculated confession, the intensity of her attention suggests she's motivated by something beyond simple greed. I'd like to hire a private investigator to look into her finances. Is that legal? I asked. Perfectly legal, David assured me. A PI can access public records, court filings, property records, business registrations, anything that's part of the public domain. They can also conduct surveillance talk to people, gather information through legitimate means. We're not hacking into her bank accounts or breaking any laws, we're just looking at what's already available if you know where to look. The investigation cost $8,000 and took 2 weeks. I spent those 2 weeks maintaining my relationship with Jennifer, accepting her dinner invitations, responding to her daily texts, listening to her stories about wanting to reconnect. It felt like wearing a mask, smiling and nodding while wondering what the truth really was. When David called me to his office to review the PI's findings, his expression was grave. "Grace, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He had a thick folder in front of him, the kind that suggested hours of research and documentation. "What I'm about to tell you is serious. Jennifer's financial situation is much worse than I anticipated." He opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Jennifer and her husband took out a second mortgage on their house 3 years ago. The amount, $300,000. According to the terms, they're currently behind on payments. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings. I stared at the document, seeing my sister's signature at the bottom. $300,000. That's not all, David continued, pulling out more papers. Public court records show that Jennifer is being sued by a private lending company called Capital Solutions, LLC. The amount they're claiming she owes $450,000. The lawsuit was filed 6 months ago. According to the filings, this was a personal loan with extremely high interest rates, the kind of predatory lending that targets desperate people. $450,000 on top of $300,000, $750,000 total. My mind was reeling. "And there's more," David said quietly. He pulled out a third set of documents, these ones looking less official. This part required my PI to use some of his casino industry contacts. It's harder to verify, but the source is reliable. Jennifer has significant gambling debts. She's been frequenting several casinos over the past 2 years, and she owes money to people who aren't traditional lenders. The estimate is around $800,000. I couldn't speak. $800,000 in gambling debts, added to the mortgage and the lawsuit that was over $1.5 million. "The timeline is what concerns me most," David said. "All of these debts are coming due within the next 90 days. The foreclosure on her house is moving forward. The lawsuit is scheduled for court next month. And the people she owes gambling money to, they're not the kind of people who wait patiently or take people to court. They have other methods of collection." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Grace, your sister is in serious trouble. The kind of trouble that makes people desperate. And when people are this desperate, they become dangerous. The question isn't if she'll do something, it's what she'll do and when." I thought about Jennifer's tears, her confession, her sudden desire to reconnect. It all took on a different meaning now. "Why doesn't she just ask me for help?" I said. "Why all the manipulation? Why not just be honest and say she needs money?" David gave me a look that was almost pitying. "Because $1.5 million is an impossible amount to ask for. Think about it. If Jennifer came to you and said, "Grace, I need you to give me $1.5 million to cover my gambling debts and save my house," what would you say? I'd ask how she got into that situation, I said slowly. Exactly. You'd ask questions she can't answer honestly. How do you tell your sister you gambled away your family's future, that you took out predatory loans, that you're in debt to dangerous people? And even if she told you the truth, you might say no. You might decide that $1.5 million is too much, that it's not your responsibility to fix her mistakes, that giving her that money would just enable her to make more destructive choices. I nodded slowly, understanding where he was going. But if you were gone, David continued, his voice gentle but firm, if something happened to you, Jennifer wouldn't have to ask. As your closest living relative, she'd have a strong claim to your estate. She could contest any will, argue that as your sister, she should inherit everything. And she'd get it all without having to explain anything to anyone. No questions about gambling, no judgment about her choices, no risk of you saying no. Just $80 million free and clear enough to pay off all her debts and still live comfortably for the rest of her life. The room felt very cold suddenly. I thought about the accident when I was 8 years old, about Margaret's photographs showing bruising consistent with being pushed, about Jennifer at 16 already capable of violence when she felt threatened or jealous. You think she'd hurt me? I said. It wasn't a question. I think she's already hurt you once, David said quietly. 28 years ago, when you were 8 and she was 16, she pushed you down those stairs. We have evidence of that. She got away with it then because your family protected her, because you were too young to understand what had happened, because people with money and lawyers can make inconvenient truths disappear. He paused. She's in a much more desperate situation now than she was then. And you're worth $80 million to her, but only if you're dead. She didn't want my help. She wanted my inheritance. I sat in David's office, the folder about Jennifer's debts still open on the desk between us, and tried to process what he was suggesting. My sister, who'd already tried to kill me once, might be planning to do it again. What do? I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. That depends, David said. We can cut all contact right now. Change your phone number, move to a different city if necessary, ensure she has no access to you or your assets. That's the safest option. Or, I could hear the alternative in his tone. Or we document everything. We give her enough rope to hang herself, legally speaking. If she's truly planning something, we need evidence. We need to catch her in the act, or at least in the planning stages. He looked at me seriously. But Grace, I need to be clear, this option is dangerous. If we're right about her intentions, you'd be putting yourself at risk. I need to talk to Margaret, I said. An hour later, I was sitting in Margaret's living room, the same room where she'd shown me the medical records from 28 years ago. I told her everything: David's investigation, Jennifer's debts, the theory that my sister might be planning to harm me for the inheritance. Margaret's face went pale. Grace, you can't put yourself in danger. Not for proof, not for justice, not for anything. You need to disappear. Let me help you start over somewhere safe. But then I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, I said, wondering when she might find me, what she might do next time. I need to know for certain. I need evidence of what she's planning, if she's planning anything at all. And if she is, Margaret asked quietly. Then we stop her, I said, before she can hurt anyone else. The three of us, Margaret, David, and I, spent the next 2 days planning. Not planning for me to fake my death or stage some elaborate trap. Planning to protect me while gathering evidence. Planning to ensure that the truth would survive even if I didn't. David explained the legal framework. We'll modify your will immediately. Add a clause that if you die under any unusual circumstances, accident, violence, anything other than natural causes in a hospital with witnesses, your entire estate goes to charity and to Margaret. Jennifer gets nothing. We'll make sure she knows about this provision eventually. It removes her motive. But not yet, I said. If we tell her now, she'll know we suspect something. Exactly. So we document it, we file it, but we don't inform her until we have evidence of intent. If she starts planning something, if she does anything suspicious, we have proof that she had motive and that we took steps to prevent it. Margaret was more focused on my physical safety. You're not going anywhere with her alone. Not to her house, not on any trips, nowhere isolated. If you meet her, it's in public places with witnesses. She's already suggesting we take a trip together, I said. To reconnect, she said. Just the two of us. Margaret's expression hardened. Absolutely not. What if I agree but document everything? I asked. What if we record her planning it, see what she's really thinking? David pulled out a small device no bigger than a button. Voice-activated recorder. You wear it and it captures everything. Legal in this state as long as you're part of the conversation. If Jennifer says anything incriminating, we'll have it on tape. Over the next week, I continued my relationship with Jennifer while wearing the recording device every time we met. She was getting more comfortable, more open. The dinners became more frequent, the phone calls longer. Grace, she said one evening over coffee, I've been thinking. We should take a trip together, just us sisters. Maybe a weekend at that cabin our family used to rent when we were kids. Remember that place? I did remember. It was remote hours from the nearest town, accessible only by a winding dirt road, the perfect place for an accident. That sounds wonderful, I said, and watched her face light up. The joy was immediate, overwhelming, almost excessive. Her eyes were too bright, her smile too wide. She grabbed my hands across the table. Really? You'll come. Oh, Grace, this will be so good for us. We can talk, really talk. No distractions, no interruptions, just sisters reconnecting. When were you thinking? I asked. How about 2 weeks from now, I'll handle all the arrangements. You don't have to worry about anything. That was the first red flag. Jennifer immediately taking control of every detail, the location, the timing, the transportation. She wanted to drive us both, she said. We'd leave Friday morning, come back Sunday evening. She'd pack everything we needed. I agreed to all of it while the recorder captured every word. Later that night, I met with David and Margaret at David's office. We listened to the recording together. Jennifer's voice filled the room, enthusiastic and warm and planning. She's controlling everything, Margaret said. The location, the schedule, the transportation. She's not suggesting a trip, she's constructing a scenario. We need to prepare for every possibility, David said. GPS tracking on your phone, obviously. A backup phone that she doesn't know about. Check-in times with both Margaret and me. Any missed check-in and we call the police immediately. I'll write everything down, I said. Everything I know, everything I suspect, everything we've discovered. If something happens to me, that letter needs to exist. We spent hours that night creating documentation. A letter explaining Jennifer's debts, the evidence from my childhood accident, the suspicious timing of her sudden affection, the trip she was planning. Copies of David's investigation. Copies of Margaret's medical records. Everything that proved Jennifer had motive and history. David sealed it in an envelope with instructions to be opened only in the event of my death or disappearance. If you don't check in if anything seems wrong, I'm opening this and taking it straight to the police, he said. Margaret hugged me tight before I left. Please reconsider this. Please just disappear instead. I can't live in fear, I said. I need to know the truth. And if the truth is that she's planning to hurt me, then I need evidence to stop her. I drove home thinking about Jennifer's face when I'd agreed to the trip. That excessive joy. That barely contained excitement. I thought about her debts, her desperation, her history of violence. I thought about the cabin in the woods, isolated and remote. I would give her exactly what she wanted, and watch her destroy herself. 3 days after I'd agreed to the cabin trip, Jennifer called me with a change of plans. Grace, I've been thinking, she said, and there was something different in her voice, an urgency I hadn't heard before. The cabin might be too much planning right now. I'm kind of swamped with the kids' schedules. What if I just came over to your place this weekend instead, just the two of us? We could open a bottle of wine, talk about everything, about the past, about us. I felt my stomach tighten. Sure, I said. That sounds fine. Great. Jennifer said, the word coming out too fast, too relieved. Saturday night, I'll come around 7. I'll bring dinner. After we hung up, I immediately called David. She changed the plan, I told him. She's not suggesting the cabin anymore. She wants to come to my apartment Saturday night. David was quiet for a moment. That's interesting. And concerning. The timeline has accelerated. Something's pushing her to move faster than she planned. What do you think it is? Could be her creditors, David said. Could be she's getting threats. Could be she's just getting impatient. But Grace, if she's coming to your home, we need to take this very seriously. Your apartment is private, isolated. If something happens there, there are no witnesses. So what do I do? You're not going to be there, David said firmly. We're going to set up a different kind of documentation. The next day, David arrived at my apartment with a man he introduced as a security specialist. They spent 4 hours installing cameras throughout my home, tiny devices hidden in smoke detectors, air vents, picture frames. The living room, the kitchen, both entry points, even the bathroom. Everything records to cloud storage, the specialist explained. Even if someone destroys the cameras themselves, we'll already have the footage backed up remotely. You can access it from any device with the password. And if she's not planning anything, I asked, if she really just wants to have wine and talk, then we have footage of a boring conversation and we delete it, David said. But if she is planning something, if she does anything suspicious, we'll have every second documented. After they left, I walked through my apartment looking at all the places where cameras were now hidden. My home, the space I'd worked so hard to create, had become a stage set for capturing evidence of potential violence. It felt surreal. David called me that evening with the final part of the plan. Friday night, you're checking into a hotel under a different name. You'll leave your apartment looking lived-in clothes in the closet, dishes in the sink, your purse on the counter. Most importantly, you'll leave your regular phone there powered off. She'll think I'm home, I said. Or that you just stepped out briefly, David confirmed. I'm giving you a backup phone. You'll check in with me every 2 hours. If you miss a check-in, I'm calling the police and going to your apartment myself. Margaret has the same schedule. Between the two of us, we'll know immediately if something goes wrong. Friday evening arrived. I packed a small overnight bag with essentials, toiletries, a change of clothes, my laptop. I left my apartment looking exactly as it would if I'd just run out for groceries. My regular phone sat on the kitchen counter, powered down. My purse was on the coffee table. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the sink. The TV was on low, playing a show I'd never finish watching. I took one last look around before I left. This apartment represented everything I'd built for myself after leaving my family-independent safety, a space that was mine alone. And now I was turning it into a trap. The hotel David had chosen was 20 minutes away, nice but not memorable. I checked in under the name Sarah Mitchell, paying cash for 2 nights. The room was generic and clean with a view of the parking lot. I sat on the bed and sent my first check-in text to David from the burner phone. Checked in? All good. His response came immediately. Confirmed. Next check-in at 9 p.m. Stay safe. I spent Friday night watching the security camera feeds on my laptop. My empty apartment stared back at me from 6 different angles. Nothing moved except the flicker of the television screen. I felt paranoid, jumpy, wondering if I'd completely overreacted. Maybe Jennifer really did just want to reconnect. Maybe I'd turned into someone who saw threats everywhere, unable to trust even simple gestures of affection. But then I remembered Margaret's photographs, the bruise patterns that didn't match a fall, the 8-year-old child I'd been broken and betrayed, the $1.5 million in debts Jennifer couldn't escape, the excessive joy on her face when I'd agreed to spend time alone with her. Saturday passed in slow motion. I checked in with David every 2 hours. I ordered room service for lunch and dinner, afraid to leave in case something happened, and I needed to get back quickly. I watched my apartment on the laptop screen, this space that should have felt safe, but now felt like a stage waiting for something terrible to unfold. At 6:30 p.m., I got a text from Jennifer on my regular phone. The message came through to the backup phone via forwarding, "On my way, can't wait to see you." I watched the camera feeds, my heart pounding. At 6:55, I saw Jennifer's car pull into the visitor parking lot. She got out carrying what looked like shopping bags. She walked to my building's entrance and buzzed my apartment. When I didn't answer, she tried again. Then she pulled out her phone and called. On my screen, I watched her standing outside my building, phone to her ear, waiting for me to answer. When the call went to voicemail, she sent a text, "I'm here, buzzer isn't working." I didn't respond. I just watched. After 10 minutes, Jennifer got back in her car. But she didn't leave. She just sat there in the parking lot waiting. She was coming to my house. I wouldn't be there. Jennifer sat in her car in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I watched on the security feeds as she occasionally looked at her phone, sent a few texts, waited. Finally, around 8 p.m., she drove away. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. "She left," I texted David. "Stay put," he responded. "Keep monitoring. She might come back." She didn't come back that night. I watched the feeds until midnight, then finally allowed myself to try to sleep. The backup phone was on the nightstand, volume turned up high, set to alert me to any motion detected by the security cameras. At 2:47 in the morning, the phone erupted with alerts. "Fire detected. Living room. Fire detected. Kitchen fire detected. Bedroom." My hands shook as I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the camera feeds. What I saw made my blood run cold. Flames. Everywhere. Not starting from one point and spreading, but erupting simultaneously in 3 different locations. The living room camera showed fire climbing the curtains. The kitchen camera captured flames shooting up from the floor near the stove. The bedroom camera showed my bed already engulfed. I watched frozen as my home burned. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path. Within 2 minutes, smoke obscured most of the camera views. Within 5 minutes, I could barely see anything through the thick black clouds. The cameras died one by one as the heat destroyed them, but the footage was already uploading to the cloud, every second documented. At 2:53 a.m., I heard sirens on the audio feed from the exterior camera. Fire trucks were arriving. I could see the flashing lights, firefighters jumping out, pulling hoses, shouting commands to each other. But it was too late. My apartment was gone. I sat on the hotel bed, my laptop showing the exterior feed of firefighters battling the blaze, and I felt something break inside me. That apartment had been everything. My independence, my safety, my fresh start. The first place that had ever been truly mine. And Jennifer had burned it to the ground, with me supposedly inside. I called David. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the hour. "Grace, are you okay?" "She did it," I whispered. "She burned my apartment. It's gone, David. Everything's gone." "But you're safe," he said firmly. "That's what matters. You're safe. Stay in that hotel room. Don't go anywhere. I'm getting dressed right now. I'll be at your apartment in 20 minutes to observe what happens next." "What about—" "The footage is all backed up," he assured me. "We have everything. Just stay where you are and stay safe." I couldn't sleep after that. I sat on the bed refreshing news websites on my phone, waiting to see if the fire made the local news. It did just after 4 a.m. Apartment fire in Riverside Complex. 1 resident unaccounted for. Cause under investigation. Unaccounted for. That was me. Grace Powell, unaccounted for. David called me at 6 a.m. The fire investigators are on scene. "It's bad, Grace. The apartment is completely destroyed. They're already saying it looks like arson, multiple points of origin evidence of accelerants. They found gasoline residue." "And me?" I asked. "They found your car in the parking lot. Your purse inside the apartment. Your phone. Neighbors told them they saw you come home Friday evening and assumed you were there." Right now, the working assumption is that you were inside when the fire started. Have they found a body? No, David said quietly. But in fires, this intent sometimes remains are completely consumed, or they're there but need to be identified through dental records DNA testing. That process takes time. Right now, you're officially missing presumed dead. I closed my eyes. Missing presumed dead. The words felt surreal. Jennifer's been notified, David continued. The police called her about an hour ago. I have a contact in the department who's keeping me informed. Apparently her reaction was dramatic. What do you mean? Screaming, crying, had to be helped to a chair. Asked repeatedly if they were sure if there was any chance you'd survived. Kept saying, "Not Grace, not my sister, we were just getting close again." Very convincing performance according to my contact. Of course it was, I said bitterly. But here's the interesting part, David said, and I could hear the edge in his voice. About 30 minutes after she was notified, she sent a text message. My contact saw it because she was still at the police station, still crying when her phone buzzed. She looked at it and quickly put it away, but the officer noticed. Through some channels I'd rather not explain, we were able to get phone records subpoenaed within hours based on the suspicious circumstances. What did it say? It's done. We're safe now. Sent to a number that's registered to her husband. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It's done. We're safe now. Not, Grace is gone, this is terrible. Not, I can't believe she's dead. But, it's done. We're safe. When investigators asked her about the text, she claimed it was about a work matter. Said she was so distraught she wasn't thinking clearly, that she'd been dealing with a stressful situation at her job and had just gotten confirmation it was resolved. She said the timing was coincidental. That's not going to hold up, I said. No, David agreed. It's not. But right now she doesn't know we have security footage. She doesn't know you're alive. She thinks she's gotten away with it. I thought about my apartment, everything I owned reduced to ash and rubble. My furniture, my clothes, my books, the life I'd built. All of it gone because my sister needed money, and I was worth more to her dead than alive. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait, David said. The arson investigation will take a few days. They'll process the scene, collect evidence, try to determine how the fire started and who started it. And in the meantime, you stay hidden, you stay safe. And we let Jennifer believe she's won. They found my things, they found my car. But they didn't find me. I spent the next 3 days in that hotel room watching my own death investigation unfold through news reports and updates from David. It was surreal being alive while the world mourned Grace Powell missing and presumed dead in an apartment fire. The fire investigators' preliminary report came back on day 2. David read it to me over the phone, his voice tight with controlled anger. It's unambiguous, he said. Arson. 3 distinct points of origin: living room, kitchen, bedroom. Accelerant used consistent with gasoline. The pattern of burn marks shows the fire was deliberately set to spread quickly and cut off escape routes. The investigators' exact words: this fire was designed to ensure the occupant could not escape. This is attempted murder, possibly successful. I closed my eyes, picturing someone, Jennifer, or whoever she'd hired, moving through my apartment in the dark, pouring gasoline, setting fires in strategic locations to trap me. The bedroom fire would have blocked the main exit. The living room fire would have cut off the balcony. The kitchen fire ensured I couldn't escape through the service entrance. It was methodical, calculated, designed to kill. The case has been transferred to homicide, David continued. Detective Sarah Chen is the lead investigator. I've already made contact with her through appropriate channels. She's good, Grace, thorough. She's not going to let this go. On day 3, David called with an update that sent chills down my spine. They've finished processing the scene, he said. They've sifted through everything, all the debris, all the ash, everything. And they found no human remains, no bones, no teeth, nothing organic that would indicate a body was present during the fire. I sat up straighter. But the fire was hot enough to completely destroy a body. That's what's unusual, David said. The investigators say that while extreme fires can destroy soft tissue, bone doesn't typically disappear completely. Especially not teeth. Dental enamel is incredibly resistant to heat. They should have found something. The lead detective, Chen, she noted it specifically in her report. Either the victim escaped before the fire started, or the body was removed prior to ignition. This is not a standard fatal fire case. So they're questioning whether I was even there, I said slowly. They're questioning everything, David confirmed. Which is exactly what we want. A suspicious death is one thing. A suspicious death with no body raises entirely different questions. Chen is treating this as a potential murder, but she's also open to other possibilities. The investigation expanded rapidly after that. David kept me informed of every development, his police contact feeding him information in exchange for what David vaguely called future considerations. Detective Chen interviewed my family. I listened to David's second-hand account with my heart pounding. Jennifer's performance was apparently very convincing, he said. Crying distraught, kept asking if they were absolutely certain you couldn't have survived. She talked about how you two had just reconnected, how she'd been planning to see you that night, but you hadn't answered the door. But, I could hear the but in his voice. But she asked about the will within 24 hours of the fire. Chen noted it in her report. Most people don't think about inheritance when they're grieving. They think about funeral arrangements, about notifying other family members, about processing their loss. Jennifer asked who Grace's attorney was, and whether there was a will on file. I felt sick. Even in her manufactured grief, Jennifer couldn't help revealing her true priorities. There's more, David said. A neighbor 3 doors down from your apartment reported seeing an unfamiliar car in the visitor parking lot around 2 a.m. the night of the fire. Dark sedan couldn't see the driver. The neighbor only noticed because their dog was barking and they looked out the window. Did they get a license plate? Partial. But here's where it gets interesting. The police pulled security camera footage from other buildings in the complex and from the 7-Eleven 2 blocks away. They're piecing together vehicle movements around the time of the fire. They've got partial footage of a dark sedan leaving the area at 2:55 a.m. right after the fire started. Partial plate match to what the neighbor saw. Can they identify it? They're working on it. The footage isn't great. It was dark, the cameras are low resolution. But the forensics team is enhancing the images. They'll figure it out eventually. I paced the small hotel room processing all of this. The investigation was moving faster than I'd anticipated. Detective Chen was asking the right questions, following the right leads, treating this as more than just a tragic accident. What's Jennifer doing now? I asked. Acting like the grieving sister. She's posted on Facebook about how devastated she is, how she can't believe you're gone, how she wishes she'd had more time with you. The family is rallying around her. There's talk of a memorial service, even though there's no body to bury. Of course there is, I said bitterly. Grace, David said, his voice serious. I need you to understand something. The investigation is moving in the right direction, but it's also moving slowly. These things take time. Forensic analysis, witness interviews, building a case. It could be weeks before they have enough evidence to make an arrest. Are you prepared to stay hidden that long? I looked around the generic hotel room that had become my entire world. I don't have a choice. If I come forward now before they have solid evidence, Jennifer could claim I staged everything. She could say I set the fire myself for insurance money or attention or to frame her. We need to wait until the evidence is undeniable. That's my assessment too, David agreed. But I need to know you're okay. Mentally, emotionally. Being dead is not easy. I'm alive, I said. That's what matters. Jennifer tried to kill me and she failed. Now we just need to make sure she pays for it. They were looking for a body. They should have been looking for a suspect. 1 week after the fire, David received a call that changed everything. Detective Chen just contacted me. He said, his voice urgent. She received an anonymous tip. Someone sent photographs of text messages, conversations between Jennifer and her husband from the night of the fire. I sat up straight in the hotel bed. "What kind of messages?" "The kind that show premeditation," David said. "Phrases like, 'We need to take care of the Grace problem tonight,' and 'make sure there's no evidence and this is our only option.' The metadata on the photos shows they were taken from another phone. Someone photographed Jennifer's phone screen." "Who would do that?" I asked, though I had a suspicion. "Chen doesn't know yet. The tip was sent from a burner email address, but whoever it was had access to Jennifer's phone, someone close enough to get their hands on it without her knowing." 2 days later, David called again. It was Marcus. "My brother." Chen tracked the email through some technical means I don't fully understand. It led back to an IP address at the house where Marcus has been staying. When she went to interview him, he broke down and admitted everything. David told me what had happened. In the aftermath of the fire, the family had gathered at my mother's house. Jennifer and her husband had stayed there, supposedly too distraught to go home. Marcus had been there too, watching his older sister play the role of grieving sibling. "Marcus said he noticed something was off," David explained. "Jennifer's grief seemed performative. She was crying in front of everyone, but when she thought no one was watching, she seemed almost relieved. He said it reminded him of when you had your accident as kids, Jennifer playing the concerned sister, while something about it all felt wrong." The night after the fire, Marcus couldn't sleep. He'd gone downstairs for water and heard Jennifer on the phone in the guest room, her voice low but urgent. When she fell asleep, he'd done something he knew was wrong but felt compelled to do. He'd gone through her phone. He found months of text messages between Jennifer and her husband, David said. Discussions about their debts, about their desperation, about how they were going to lose everything. And then, after you won the lottery, the messages changed. They started talking about the Grace situation and how it was the only solution. Marcus had photographed every relevant message on his own phone, then sent them anonymously to the detective. When Chen confronted him with the evidence of his involvement, he'd confessed immediately. "He feels guilty," David said. "He said he should have done something sooner, should have warned you, should have protected you. He's willing to testify about everything, the messages, Jennifer's behavior, all of it." While Marcus was coming forward, Detective Chen was building the financial component of her case. She'd obtained warrants for Jennifer's bank records, credit reports, and court documents. What she found painted a damning picture. David read me the highlights from Chen's report. Subject Jennifer Powell and spouse have accumulated approximately $1.5 million in debt over the past 3 years. Breakdown includes $300,000 in home equity loans currently in foreclosure, $450,000 owed to Capital Solutions LLC per civil lawsuit filed 6 months ago, and approximately $800,000 in gambling debts to multiple casinos and private lenders. Financial records show mounting pressure from creditors with foreclosure proceedings initiated and lawsuit pending. Subject's financial situation reached critical status approximately 3 months ago. 3 months ago, I repeated. Right before I won the lottery. Exactly, David said. Chen has established a clear timeline. Jennifer was facing financial catastrophe. Then you won $80 million. As your next of kin, if you died without a will clearly allocating your assets, she'd have a strong claim to your estate. Desperation plus opportunity equals motive. The final piece of evidence came from surveillance footage and cell phone data. Detective Chen had been methodical, pulling footage from every camera within a 2-mile radius of my apartment complex. Traffic cameras, business security systems, ATM cameras, everything. They found the car, David told me on day 10. A dark blue sedan leaving the area at 2:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the fire started. The license plate was partially obscured, but they got enough digits to run it through DMV records. The car is registered to Jennifer's husband, Brian Powell. When detectives interviewed Brian, he'd initially denied being anywhere near my apartment that night. He claimed he was home asleep, but Chen had already subpoenaed his cell phone records. GPS data doesn't lie, David explained. Brian's phone pinged off cell towers that put him within 2 blocks of your apartment at 2:45 a.m. The data shows he arrived around 2:30 and left at 2:53. He was there, Grace, during the exact window when the fire was set. When confronted with the GPS evidence, Brian's story changed. He admitted being in the area but claimed he was just driving around because he couldn't sleep. He said he didn't know about the fire until later, but the timing was too precise, too coincidental to be believable. Chen isn't buying it, David said. She's building a conspiracy case. Jennifer provided the motive and the planning. Brian executed it. The text messages show they were working together. The financial records show why they were desperate. The surveillance and GPS data put him at the scene. It's all coming together. I felt a strange mixture of emotions listening to all of this. Relief that the truth was being uncovered. Anger at what Jennifer and Brian had tried to do. Sadness that Marcus had been caught in the middle, struggling with his conscience. There's just one problem, David said quietly. What? Chen has evidence of arson. She has evidence of motive. She has evidence that Jennifer and Brian were planning something against you. But she doesn't have a body. She doesn't have definitive proof that they intended to kill you specifically as opposed to just burn your apartment for some other reason. What are you saying? I'm saying that to make a murder charge stick to ensure Jennifer and Brian face the full consequences of what they did, Detective Chen needs you to come forward. She needs the victim to be alive and able to testify about what happened, about the threats, about the pattern of behavior. They had the evidence. They just needed the victim. On day 21 of being legally dead, David told me he was calling a family meeting. It's time, he said over the phone. Detective Chen has enough evidence to move forward, but the family is getting restless. Jennifer has been calling my office every other day, asking about your will, about your assets, about when things can be settled. She's trying to sound grief-stricken and practical at the same time, and she's not pulling it off. What are you going to tell them? I asked from my hotel room where I'd been living like a ghost for 3 weeks. The truth, David said, or at least the part of the truth they need to hear right now. He scheduled the meeting for 2 p.m. on a Thursday at his office. He invited my mother Jennifer and her husband Brian, Robert, Marcus, and Sarah, the whole family except me, the person they thought was dead. David called me 20 minutes before the meeting. I've set up my phone to live stream audio to you. You'll be able to hear everything. Are you ready? I wasn't sure I was ready, but I said yes anyway. I sat on the hotel bed with my laptop headphones on, listening to my family arrive at David's office. I could hear the small talk, the subdued greetings, the weight of manufactured grief in their voices. All except Marcus, whose guilt David had told me was eating him alive. David's voice came through clearly as he called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time. I've called you here today to discuss Grace's estate and the legal structure she put in place before her death. Before her death? My mother's voice confused. You mean before the fire? Yes, David said calmly. Grace came to see me approximately 3 months ago, shortly after she won the lottery. She was very concerned about protecting her assets and ensuring her wishes would be carried out regardless of what might happen to her. I heard Jennifer's voice, carefully controlled. That's very responsible of her. Grace was always so responsible. The irony of Jennifer saying that word responsible made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Grace established an irrevocable trust, David continued. I am the primary trustee along with Margaret Chen as co-trustee. The trust contains all of Grace's assets from her lottery winnings minus what she'd already spent or distributed. Who's Margaret Chen? Robert asked. A friend of Grace's, David said simply. Someone Grace trusted implicitly. I could imagine Jennifer's mind working, trying to place the name, wondering if this was someone who might complicate her plans. The trust has very specific terms, David said, and I heard papers rustling. I'm going to read them to you exactly as Grace wrote them. In the event of my death or disappearance under any circumstances that could be construed as suspicious, violent, accidental, or otherwise non-natural, the following conditions shall apply. 100% of the assets in this trust shall be distributed to the following charitable organizations. David listed several charities I'd chosen, organizations supporting abuse survivors, children in foster care and medical research. The room was completely silent. 2. David continued reading. Margaret Chen shall receive a personal bequest of $5 million in recognition of her care and friendship. 3. No member of my biological family shall receive any inheritance, gift, or distribution from this trust under these circumstances. 4. All documentation, evidence, recordings, and materials related to my death shall be immediately turned over to law enforcement for investigation. I heard someone gasp, then Jennifer's voice rising with barely controlled panic. That's ridiculous. Grace wouldn't do something like this. She loved her family. She was just starting to reconnect with us. Grace was very clear about her intentions. David said, his voice maddeningly calm. She came to my office multiple times to refine these terms. She was quite specific about the conditions under which her family would be excluded from inheritance. This is insane, Jennifer said louder now. When did she do this? Why didn't she tell us? She created the initial trust structure 12 weeks ago, David said. She made the final amendments 8 weeks ago. As for why she didn't tell you, I can only speculate that she had her reasons. 8 weeks ago. Right after Jennifer had refused to lend me $600. Right after I'd seen the Facebook photos of their expensive vacation and designer purchases. The timing wasn't accidental. What if it wasn't suspicious? My mother asked, her voice small. What if the fire was just an accident? The fire has been ruled arson by the fire investigator, David said flatly. Multiple points of origin accelerant used clear evidence of intentional ignition. This was not an accident. Therefore, the suspicious circumstances clause is activated. But Grace is dead. Jennifer's voice was breaking now, though I couldn't tell if it was from genuine distress or fury. We're her family. We deserve. You deserve what Grace decided you deserve, David interrupted, steel in his voice. Which under these circumstances is nothing. Brian spoke for the first time, his voice tight. This isn't legal. We can contest this. A trust can be challenged. You can try, David said. But I should warn you, irrevocable trusts are extremely difficult to contest, especially when the truster's intentions were so clearly documented. Grace met with me multiple times. We have video recordings of her stating her wishes. We have written documentation of her reasoning. And most importantly, she was of sound mind and under no duress when she created this trust. Any contest would be expensive, time-consuming, and very likely to fail. What was her reasoning? Marcus asked quietly. Why would she cut out her family? That's between Grace and me, David said. Attorney-client privilege doesn't end with death. What I can tell you is that Grace had concerns about her family's motivations and their treatment of her over the years. She wanted to ensure that her assets went to causes she cared about, rather than to people she felt had never valued her except for what she could provide. The silence that followed was deafening. I could imagine Jennifer's face, the realization sinking in. She'd tried to kill me for my money, and now that money was forever out of her reach. Even if I was dead, even if she'd succeeded, she would get nothing. When will the distribution happen? Sarah asked. That depends on several factors, David said. Technically, Grace is currently classified as missing, not deceased. No death certificate has been issued because no body has been found. The trust's terms activate upon confirmation of death under suspicious circumstances. Given that the fire is under active criminal investigation, distribution will be delayed until that investigation concludes. Criminal investigation, my mother said. What do you mean? The police are investigating the fire as attempted murder, David said. Possibly successful, though, as I mentioned, no body has been recovered. Detective Sarah Chen is the lead investigator. I expect you'll all be hearing from her if you haven't already. Another silence. I wondered if Jennifer and Brian were looking at each other, wondering how much the police knew, how much evidence had been found. This is a nightmare, Jennifer said, and for once she sounded genuinely distressed. First we lose Grace, and now we find out she didn't trust us, didn't love us enough to leave us anything, after everything we did for her growing up. I felt bile rise in my throat at those words. Everything they did for me, like assigning me the role of family servant, like covering up the fact that Jennifer pushed me down the stairs, like never being there when I needed them but always expecting me to be there for them. "I'm sorry you feel that way," David said, and I could hear that he wasn't sorry at all. "But Grace's wishes are clear and legally binding. Unless the circumstances of her death change, unless it's somehow determined to be natural causes, which seems impossible given the arson evidence the trust's distribution plan stands." "So we get nothing," Jennifer said flatly, "even though we're her family, even though we loved her." "That's correct," David said. "You get nothing." I heard movement chairs scraping people standing. The meeting was ending. My family was leaving David's office with the knowledge that all their planning, all Jennifer's desperation, all the violence and manipulation and attempted murder had been for absolutely nothing. Even if I was dead, Jennifer had lost. But I wasn't dead, and the game was just beginning. She thought she'd won. She didn't know the game had just begun. After the meeting at David's office, where my family learned they would inherit nothing, I spent another week in the hotel. Detective Chen and David were coordinating the final pieces of the case, making sure everything was airtight before we moved to the next phase. "Are you ready?" David asked me during one of our daily calls. "Once you come forward, there's no going back. You'll have to testify, face your family, relive everything." I looked around the hotel room that had been my home for 4 weeks. I'd been legally dead for a month, watching my family from a distance, seeing their true nature exposed. I'd lost my apartment, my belongings, the physical space I'd built for myself. But I'd gained something more valuable: absolute clarity about who they were and what they were capable of. "I'm ready," I said. Detective Chen made the call to Jennifer on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't on the line, but David relayed the conversation to me later. "Ms. Powell, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the police department. We need you to come to the station today. We have new evidence regarding your sister's case." "What kind of evidence?" Jennifer had asked, trying to sound hopeful rather than terrified. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come in at 2 p.m.? You're welcome to bring your attorney." Jennifer arrived at the police station at 1:55 with a lawyer. David recognized a criminal defense attorney named Richard Morrison, who specialized in white-collar crime. Interesting choice for someone who was supposedly just a grieving sister. I was already there waiting in interview room B with David Detective Chen and another detective named Rodriguez who would serve as a witness. I'd spent an hour that morning getting ready, choosing my clothes carefully. I wanted to look alive, healthy, undeniably real. I wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, my hair pulled back. No makeup to hide behind, no performance. Just me. Through the one-way glass, I watched Jennifer and her lawyer being led down the hallway. Jennifer looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, her hair not quite as perfectly styled as usual, her clothes expensive, but rumpled. A month of stress was showing on her. Detective Chen stepped out to greet them. "Ms. Powell, Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming. Please follow me." She led them to our interview room. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. 4 weeks of hiding, 4 weeks of being dead, all leading to this moment. The door opened. Jennifer walked in, her lawyer behind her, and her eyes scanned the room. David professional and impassive. Detective Rodriguez taking notes. Detective Chen gesturing to chairs across the table. And then Jennifer's eyes landed on me. The color drained from her face so completely I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. "Ms. Powell," Detective Chen said calmly, "please have a seat. You seem shocked to see your sister alive." Jennifer couldn't take her eyes off me. She was staring like I was a ghost, like her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Her lawyer touched her elbow, guiding her into the chair, but she moved like a puppet, mechanical and disconnected. "Grace." The word came out as barely a whisper. "You're... How... You thought I was dead," I said. My voice was steady, calm, Nothing like the terrified child I'd been at 8 years old, or the invisible woman I'd been for 36 years. The fire destroyed my apartment. My car was in the parking lot. My purse and phone were inside. Everyone assumed I died in the fire. "But you're alive," Jennifer said, and I couldn't tell if it was relief or horror in her voice. "You're alive. Why didn't you contact us? We've been grieving. We had a memorial service planned. We thought—" "I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I was dead," I interrupted. "I wanted to watch. I wanted to know the truth." Her lawyer finally found his voice. "Detective Chen, what is this about? If Ms. Powell is alive, then why are we here?" Detective Chen opened a folder and began laying out photographs on the table between us. Surveillance stills showing a dark sedan near my apartment. Enhanced images of a partial license plate. Cell phone tower maps with GPS coordinates highlighted. And finally screenshots of text messages. "We're here," Chen said, "because we have evidence that your client and her husband conspired to commit arson and attempted murder. The fire at Grace Powell's apartment was not an accident. It was deliberately set in 3 locations using gasoline as an accelerant. The fire was designed to block escape routes and ensure that anyone inside would die." Jennifer's eyes were fixed on the photographs, her face getting whiter with each one Chen laid down. "Furthermore," Chen continued, "we have text messages between Ms. Jennifer Powell and her husband Brian Powell discussing the Grace problem and how they needed to take care of it tonight. We have financial records showing Ms. Powell was over $1.5 million in debt and facing imminent foreclosure and legal action. We have evidence that Grace Powell had recently won $80 million in the lottery. And we have GPS data and surveillance footage placing Mr. Brian Powell's vehicle at the scene of the fire at the exact time it was set." "This is circumstantial," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually," David spoke for the first time, "we also have something else. Security camera footage from inside Grace's apartment showing the fire being set. The cameras uploaded to cloud storage before they were destroyed. We have everything." That was a slight exaggeration. The cameras had caught the fire spreading, but not the actual person setting it since Grace wasn't there. But the bluff worked. Jennifer's eyes widened. I leaned forward, looking directly at my sister. "You tried to kill me. Again. Just like you did when I was 8 years old." "Don't say anything," Morrison said sharply to Jennifer. But I kept talking. "I have medical records from when I was 8. Photographs of bruising patterns that show I was pushed, not that I fell. Testimony from the nurse who tried to report it but was silenced by our family's lawyers. I know what you did then, Jennifer, and I know what you tried to do now." Jennifer's face had gone from white to red. Her hands were shaking. She opened her mouth closed. It looked at her lawyer, looked back at me. "I don't—" she started. "This is insane. Grace, I would never—" "You pushed me down the stairs when I was 8 years old. I said each word clear and deliberate. You nearly killed me. Our parents covered it up, and when you found out I had $80 million when you were drowning in debt and desperate, you decided to finish what you started." "That's not—" Jennifer's voice broke. "I didn't—" But her face told the truth. The shock when she saw me alive. The fear when she saw the evidence. The recognition when I mentioned the stairs. Every emotion flickering across her features was being captured by the camera in the corner of the interview room. "My client has nothing to say," Morrison said firmly, putting his hand on Jennifer's arm. "This interview is over." "That's fine," Detective Chen said. "We have enough. Jennifer Powell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson and attempted murder." Jennifer stood up shakily as Chen read her rights. She was staring at me the whole time, and I could see the moment of complete realization in her eyes. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be dead, and she was supposed to inherit everything. All her planning, all her desperation, all her violence, and it had led to this handcuffs clicking around her wrists while her supposedly dead sister watched. "Grace," she said as Chen began to lead her out. "Please, I'm your sister." "No," I said quietly. A sister wouldn't push an 8-year-old down the stairs. A sister wouldn't refuse $600 and then spend $15,000 on vacation. A sister wouldn't burn down your home with you supposedly inside. You were never my sister, Jennifer. You were just someone who shared my DNA. She was led out of the room, still staring at me over her shoulder, her face a mask of disbelief and devastation. When the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. David put his hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," I corrected. Detective Chen smiled. "Welcome back from the dead Ms. Powell. I wasn't supposed to be here." Jennifer's arraignment was set for the following morning. I attended, sitting in the public gallery with Margaret on one side and David on the other. I wanted Jennifer to see me there alive and watching as the prosecutor laid out the case against her. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. Jennifer was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. She'd clearly been crying, her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy. When she saw me in the gallery, she flinched like I'd struck her. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judith Martinez, called the court to order. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Wright, stood to present the charges. "Your Honor, the defendant, Jennifer Lynn Powell, is charged with conspiracy to commit arson in the first degree and attempted murder in the first degree. The evidence against her is substantial and compelling." Wright opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "I'd like to begin with phone records obtained through a valid warrant. These records show text message exchanges between the defendant and her husband, Brian Powell, in the days leading up to and including the night of the fire." He projected the messages onto a screen for the court to see. I watched Jennifer's face as her own words appeared enlarged for everyone to read. September 15th, 9:47 p.m. Jennifer to Brian. "We need to talk about the Grace situation. This can't continue." September 16th, 11:23 p.m. Brian to Jennifer. "What are you suggesting?" September 16th, 11:31 p.m. Jennifer to Brian. "I'm saying we need a permanent solution. We're out of time." September 18th, 8:15 p.m. Jennifer to Brian. "Saturday night, she'll be home. We do it then." September 18th, 8:17 p.m. Brian to Jennifer. "Are you sure about this?" September 18th, 8:22 p.m. Jennifer to Brian. "Do you want to lose everything? This is our only option." September 21st, 1:47 a.m. Jennifer to Brian. "Are you in position?" September 21st, 1:52 a.m. Brian to Jennifer. "Yes, back entrance like we discussed." September 21st, 2:03 a.m. Jennifer to Brian. "Make sure there's no evidence, nothing that can be traced back." September 21st, 2:51 a.m. Jennifer to Brian. "Is it done?" September 21st, 2:55 a.m. Brian to Jennifer. "Yes, I'm leaving now." September 21st, 3:17 a.m. Jennifer to Brian. "It's done. We're safe now." The courtroom was completely silent as people absorbed the messages. The timestamps were damning. The final exchanges corresponded exactly with the time the fire had been set. "The defense may argue that these messages refer to something else," Wright continued. "However, when we arrested Mr. Brian Powell and placed him in a separate interrogation room, he confessed. He admitted to setting the fire at his wife's urging. He stated, and I quote from the transcript, "Jennifer said we had no choice. She said Grace's lottery money was our only way out of the debt, but Grace would never give us enough to matter. She said if Grace died, Jennifer would inherit everything as next of kin. She planned it all. I just did what she told me to do." Jennifer's lawyer Morrison stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Powell's statement was given under duress. He was read his Miranda rights and agreed to speak without coercion." Wright interrupted. We have the entire interrogation on video. Mr. Powell was calm, lucid, and provided detailed information about how the fire was set, where he purchased the gasoline, and how his wife instructed him to ensure there were no survivors. Judge Martinez looked at Morrison. You'll have the opportunity to challenge the admissibility of the confession at trial. For now, I'm allowing it for the purpose of this arraignment. Continue, Mr. Wright. Wright moved to his next point. Your Honor, the motive in this case is equally clear. I'd like to submit financial records for the defendant and her husband. He presented documents showing the full scope of Jennifer's debts. The home equity loans, the lawsuit from Capital Solutions LLC, the casino records showing mounting gambling losses. I watched the numbers flash on the screen: 300,000, 450,000, 800,000. $1.5 million total. These debts came due within a 90-day window, Wright explained. The defendant's house was in active foreclosure. The civil lawsuit was scheduled for court. And according to testimony from casino security personnel, the defendant had received multiple warnings from private lenders about consequences if payment wasn't received. He pulled up another set of documents. Furthermore, in the 3 weeks before the fire, the defendant conducted multiple internet searches from her home computer. These searches included: how long until missing person declared dead, inheritance laws without will in our state, can siblings inherit lottery winnings, and fire investigation process. I saw Jennifer close her eyes, her face crumpling. She'd been so careful about the text messages using vague language, but she'd never thought to clear her browser history. The defendant knew her sister Grace had won $80 million in the lottery, Wright continued. She knew that if Grace died without a comprehensive will, she would have a strong claim as next of kin to the entire estate. She researched the process, planned the method, and enlisted her husband to execute the plan. The financial motive is overwhelming. Morrison stood again. Your Honor, financial difficulties don't prove intent to murder. Many people have debt. That doesn't make them killers. True, Judge Martinez said. But combined with the other evidence, it establishes motive. Continue, Mr. Wright. Wright nodded. Your Honor, there's one more element to this case that I believe is crucial for the court to understand. This wasn't the first time the defendant attempted to harm her sister. He gestured to the back of the courtroom. I'd like to call Margaret Chen as a witness to provide historical context. Margaret stood, her hands shaking slightly, and made her way to the witness stand. She was sworn in, and Wright approached her gently. Ms. Chen, can you explain your connection to this case? Margaret's voice was steady despite her nervousness. I was Grace Powell's nurse when she was 8 years old. She'd been admitted to the hospital with severe spinal injuries from a fall down the stairs. And what did you observe about those injuries? The bruising pattern was inconsistent with a self-inflicted fall, Margaret said clearly. When someone tumbles downstairs, they hit multiple surfaces at different angles. The bruising is scattered, irregular. Grace had concentrated bruising between her shoulder blades, the kind caused by a single forceful push from behind. She pulled out the folder she'd kept for 28 years. I documented everything. I took photographs which I provided to the prosecutor. I wrote detailed nursing notes. I reported my concerns to my supervisors. What happened when you reported it? Wright asked. Grace's family had lawyers threaten the hospital with a lawsuit for false accusations. They found another doctor who said the injuries could be accidental. Child Protective Services investigated, but Grace was 8 years old, frightened, and in terrible pain. When they asked if someone pushed her, she said no. The case was closed. I was fired shortly after for causing problems. Wright displayed the medical photographs on the screen, 28-year-old images of a child's back covered in bruises. I saw several people in the courtroom wince. And who was supposed to be watching Grace at the time of this childhood accident? Wright asked. Her older sister, Margaret said, looking directly at Jennifer. Jennifer Powell. She was 16 years old at the time. Detective Chen took the stand next, adding her professional analysis. Based on Ms. Chen's testimony and medical evidence combined with the current attempt on Grace Powell's life, we see a clear pattern. The defendant has a history of violence toward her sister. When she was 16 and felt threatened or jealous, she pushed an 8-year-old child down the stairs, nearly killing her. The family covered it up. She faced no consequences. And now, 28 years later, when she's desperate for money and sees her sister as an obstacle to financial salvation, she attempts murder again. This time we have irrefutable evidence. This time, she doesn't get away with it. Morrison tried to object, tried to claim the childhood incident was irrelevant, but Judge Martinez overruled him. Pattern evidence is admissible to show modus operandi and propensity. I'll allow it. Wright concluded his presentation by displaying the security footage from the building's exterior cameras. Your Honor, we have surveillance showing Mr. Brian Powell's vehicle arriving at the apartment complex at 2:32 a.m. and leaving at 2:53 a.m. We have GPS data from his cell phone confirming his location. We have his confession describing exactly how he set 3 fires in different locations of Grace Powell's apartment using gasoline. We have the defendant's text messages coordinating the attack. We have her financial desperation providing motive. We have her internet searches showing premeditation. And we have historical evidence that this defendant has attempted to harm her sister before and escaped justice. He turned to face Jennifer directly. The defendant thought she could kill her sister and inherit millions. She thought a fire would destroy all evidence. She thought no one would question the death of a woman living alone. She was wrong on every count. Judge Martinez looked at Jennifer, who sat slumped in her chair, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Ms. Powell, how do you plead to these charges? Morrison stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. We intend to fight these charges vigorously. But as I watched Jennifer's face, I saw something Morrison didn't. She knew it was over. The phone records were her own words. The confession was from her own husband. The financial records were undeniable. The childhood evidence showed this wasn't an aberration, but a pattern. There was no defense for this, no way to explain it away, no lawyer clever enough to make a jury believe she was innocent. Judge Martinez set bail at $5 million, an amount Jennifer couldn't possibly raise given her debts, and ordered her held in custody pending trial. As the bailiffs led Jennifer away, she looked at me one last time. Not with anger or hatred, but with something like resignation. She'd gambled everything on my death, and she'd lost. Not just her freedom, but any hope of escape from the consequences of what she'd done. She had no more lies left. The trial never happened. 2 weeks after the arraignment, Morrison came to the prosecutor's office with an offer. Jennifer wanted to negotiate a plea deal. David called me with the news. She knows she can't win at trial. The evidence is too strong. Morrison is trying to get her the best deal he can. What are they offering? I asked. She'll plead guilty to attempted murder in the first degree and arson in the first degree. In exchange, the prosecutor will recommend a sentence of 15 to 20 years instead of life without parole. It's a significant reduction, but it also guarantees she goes to prison without the uncertainty of a trial. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Jennifer face a jury, wanted 12 strangers to hear everything she'd done and render their judgment. But another part of me just wanted it to be over. What do you think I should do? I asked. I think you should consider what you want from this, David said carefully. Do you want revenge, or do you want closure? A trial could take years with appeals. A plea deal means she admits guilt, goes to prison, and you can move forward with your life. I chose closure. The plea hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Jennifer stood before Judge Martinez and admitted in a voice barely above a whisper that she had conspired with her husband to burn down my apartment while I was supposedly inside. She admitted that she'd done it for money out of desperation, knowing it would kill me. Brian had already pleaded guilty in a separate hearing. He'd received 12 years for his role as the one who actually set the fire. At Jennifer's sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I'd written it carefully, revised it dozens of times with Margaret's help, trying to find the right words to express what this had meant to me. I stood at the podium looking at Jennifer seated at the defense table. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She'd lost weight in jail, her expensive clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair hanging limp and unwashed. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. I didn't come here today wanting revenge. I came wanting justice. There's a difference. I gripped the edges of the podium. When I was 8 years old, this woman pushed me down a flight of stairs. I broke my spine. I nearly died. I spent 4 months in a hospital learning to walk again. I live with chronic pain to this day. But when a nurse tried to report what had happened, my family silenced her. They hired lawyers, they threatened the hospital, they made sure no one would believe that their perfect 16-year-old daughter could be capable of violence. And it worked. Jennifer faced no consequences. She learned that she could hurt me and get away with it. Jennifer's shoulders were shaking. I didn't know if she was crying or just trembling. 28 years later, I won the lottery. And when Jennifer found herself drowning in debt, desperate and cornered, she decided to finish what she started. She planned to burn my home with me inside it. She thought I would die and she would inherit everything. She thought once again she could hurt me and face no consequences. I paused, letting the words sink in. But this time the truth came out. This time there were no lawyers to silence the evidence, no family to cover up the crime. This time the law held her accountable. I finally looked directly at Jennifer. I don't want revenge. I don't take pleasure in seeing you in that jumpsuit or knowing you'll spend years in prison. But I needed the truth to be acknowledged. I needed someone in authority to say what happened to you was wrong. What she did was a crime. You deserved to be protected and you weren't. My voice broke slightly. For 36 years, I've been the invisible one, the one whose pain didn't matter, the one who was expected to forgive and forget, and keep serving the people who hurt me. Today, for the first time in my life, I feel seen. I feel heard. And that's what justice means to me. Judge Martinez thanked me and asked if Jennifer wanted to say anything. Morrison advised her not to speak, but Jennifer stood anyway. "Grace," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now. I know I can't take back what I did, but I'm sorry. I was desperate and I convinced myself. I told myself you wouldn't really be hurt, that it would be quick, that I had no choice. But I did have a choice. I could have asked you for help. I could have filed for bankruptcy. I could have faced my debts like an adult. Instead, I tried to kill you. And I'm sorry." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard Jennifer say. Too late, and nowhere near enough but honest. Judge Martinez handed down the sentence: 18 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. Jennifer would be 60 years old before she had any chance of freedom. But prison was only part of what Jennifer lost. Her house, already in foreclosure, was seized and sold to pay her creditors. Brian filed for divorce within a month of his own sentencing, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking full custody of their children. Jennifer's teenage son and daughter wrote letters to the court saying they didn't want to see their mother again. The community that had once embraced Jennifer turned on her completely. The church where she'd been a deacon asked her to resign from all positions. The country club revoked her membership. The mothers group she'd led wanted nothing to do with her. Friends deleted her from social media, crossed the street to avoid her, family whispered when Brian and the kids walked by. The perfect image Jennifer had cultivated for 42 years shattered in a single news cycle. Headlines called her the sister who tried to kill for millions. Talk shows discussed the case. True crime podcasts dissected every detail of her crimes. Jennifer Powell became synonymous with greed and betrayal. She lost everything: her freedom, her family, her home, her reputation, her place in the community. Every carefully constructed piece of her life fell apart. And I watched it all happen from a distance, feeling not satisfaction exactly, but something quieter. Relief, vindication. The knowledge that truth, even delayed for 28 years, eventually finds its way to light. She lost everything. But I gained something she could never take: freedom. After Jennifer was sentenced and taken away to begin her 18 years in prison, I expected to feel relief. I expected the nightmares to stop, the constant vigilance to ease, the weight I'd carried for so long to finally lift. Instead, I felt worse. The first night after the sentencing, I woke up at 3 a.m. in a panic, convinced I smelled smoke. I checked every room in the new apartment I'd rented, searched for fire, found nothing. But my heart was racing and my hands were shaking and I couldn't convince my body that I was safe. The second night, I dreamed about the stairs. I was 8 years old again, standing at the top, and I could hear Jennifer's footsteps behind me. I kept trying to turn around, trying to see her face, but I couldn't move. In the dream, I fell over and over, each time waking up with a gasp just before I hit the bottom. Margaret found me on the third morning sitting on my couch in the same clothes I'd worn the day before, staring at nothing. "Grace," she said gently, sitting beside me. "When did you last sleep?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I keep thinking I should feel better now. Jennifer's in prison. It's over. But I can't sleep, and when I do sleep, I have nightmares, and every unexpected sound makes me jump." Margaret took my hand. "You've been through trauma. Multiple traumas actually spanning your entire life. Justice doesn't erase that. It doesn't magically heal 28 years of abuse and betrayal. You need help processing this." She gave me the name of a trauma therapist, Dr. Elizabeth Huang, who specialized in complex PTSD and family abuse. I made an appointment for that week. Dr. Huang's office was nothing like I'd expected, no sterile white walls or intimidating leather couch. It was warm, filled with plants and soft lighting with comfortable chairs arranged so we could talk face to face. She didn't make me lie down or close my eyes or do anything I'd seen in movies. She just asked me to tell her my story. I talked for the entire first session. About being the invisible child, the helper who was never helped. About the accident at 8 and the 28 years of chronic pain. About working 2 jobs and living small while giving everything to a family that never gave back. About the lottery and the test and watching their true nature revealed on Facebook. About Margaret and David and the plan to catch Jennifer. About living in a hotel for 4 weeks legally dead, watching my life from the outside. When I finished, Dr. Huang said something that surprised me. "You've been surviving for so long that you don't know how to live. Now that you're safe, your body doesn't know what to do with safety. It's waiting for the next threat." We met twice a week after that. She taught me techniques for managing the panic attacks and the nightmares. We worked through the layers of trauma, not just the recent fire and Jennifer's attempt on my life, but the decades of emotional neglect that had preceded it. We talked about how being invisible had been a survival strategy that no longer served me, and how I could learn to take up space in the world. It wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and clear-headed. Other days I couldn't leave my apartment because every car backfiring sounded like an explosion, every stranger on the street looked threatening. But slowly, incrementally, I started to heal. 2 months after the trial, my phone started ringing with calls from family members. My mother first, then Sarah, then Robert. They'd waited until things calmed down to reach out, they said. They wanted to apologize, to explain that they hadn't known what Jennifer was planning, that they felt terrible about everything that had happened. I listened to the voicemails and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desire to respond. These were the same people who'd refused me $600 while spending thousands on themselves. The same people who'd built a family structure with me at the bottom. The same people who'd covered up Jennifer's violence when I was 8, and then pretended it never happened. They hadn't known about the fire, specifically maybe. But they'd known who Jennifer was. They'd known what they'd all been to me for 36 years. And they'd been fine with it until it became a criminal case that reflected poorly on them. I changed my phone number and didn't give it to any of them. I moved to a different city 3 hours away, a place where no one knew my story, unless I chose to tell them. I bought a small house with a garden, the first home I'd ever owned. I painted the walls colors I liked, bought furniture that was comfortable rather than cheap, created a space that was entirely mine. Some family members tried to find me through David. He told them, as I'd instructed, that I didn't wish to have contact, and that they should respect that decision. A few sent letters to his office anyway. I didn't read them. Whatever apologies or explanations they contained didn't matter to me anymore. Dr. Huang asked me if I felt guilty about cutting them off completely. "No," I said, and realized I meant it. I spent my whole life trying to earn their love, trying to be good enough, helpful enough, invisible enough. I finally understand that nothing I did was ever the problem. They're incapable of the kind of love I needed. And I don't have to forgive them or maintain a relationship just because we share DNA. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Moving forward doesn't require their permission or their understanding. What I did build was a relationship with Margaret that felt more like family than anything I'd experienced growing up. We had dinner every Sunday, taking turns cooking. We called each other during the week just to check in, no agenda, no requests for favors. We celebrated small things, Margaret's garden blooming my first full week of sleeping through the night, the anniversary of the day I'd called her asking for $600. She was 73 years my mother's age, but she gave me what my mother never had: unconditional presence, genuine interest in my well-being, and the security of knowing someone would show up just because they cared. I learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about choice and consistency, and showing up over and over even when there was nothing to gain. I didn't need them to understand. 1 year after Jennifer's sentencing, I sat on the back porch of my new house, watching the sun set over the water. The house wasn't oceanfront exactly. I couldn't afford that. Even with lottery winnings I was being careful with, but it was close enough that I could walk to the beach in 5 minutes and hear the waves on quiet nights. Margaret was with me, as she often was on Sunday evenings. We'd just finished dinner, and now we were sitting with tea watching the sky turn orange and pink. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd told them right away?" Margaret asked. "If you'd announced the lottery win and just hoped for the best?" I considered the question. "I think I'd be dead," I said honestly. "Or broke, or both. Jennifer would have found a way to take everything one way or another." "The money didn't save you," Margaret said quietly. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "I know. For a while I thought it did. I thought having $80 million gave me power, gave me control. But it was never about the money. It was about finally having the courage to see them clearly, to stop hoping they'd change, and to protect myself instead of waiting for them to love me." The truth was that money had only revealed what was already there. It hadn't changed my family. It had simply exposed their true priorities with brutal clarity. $600 versus $80 million. The amount didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd never been valuable to them for who I was, only for what I could provide. "You survived by refusing to become like them," Margaret said. "That's what I admire most about you, Grace. You had every reason to become bitter, cruel, vengeful. Instead, you became strong. I wasn't sure I felt strong most days, but I was learning that strength didn't mean never being afraid or hurt. It meant choosing to keep going anyway. 6 months earlier, I'd done something that felt both terrifying and necessary. I'd established a foundation called the Second Chance Foundation, dedicated to helping survivors of family abuse and children in foster care. I'd donated $10 million to start it, hired professionals to run it, and created programs that focused on what I wished I'd had: therapy, legal support, financial independence training, and a network of people who understood. The Foundation's first newsletter had included a brief version of my story. Not the sensational details that had been in the news, but the emotional truth of growing up invisible and learning to value myself anyway. I'd been nervous about sharing it, worried it was too personal or that no one would care. Instead, I'd received hundreds of letters. One letter in particular had made me cry. It was from a woman named Patricia, 43 years old, who'd been supporting her siblings financially for 2 decades while they treated her like an ATM. She wrote, "Your story showed me that loving yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. I've spent my whole life thinking I was obligated to sacrifice everything because we're family. You helped me understand that family should be reciprocal, and it's okay to walk away when it's not. Thank you for giving me permission to choose myself." I'd read that letter to Dr. Huang during our next session. "I think this is what it was all for," I'd said. "Not the money, not even the justice. It was so I could help other people see what I couldn't see for so many years." "Your pain has purpose now," Dr. Huang had agreed. "You've transformed it into something that helps others. That's powerful. Sitting on my porch with Margaret watching the sunset, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in my first 36 years peace. Not the absence of pain. I still had nightmares, sometimes still flinched at unexpected sounds, still carried the chronic ache in my back from that staircase fall at 8 years old. But I had something deeper than comfort. I had clarity. I understood now what my family had never been able to teach me, that worth isn't earned through service or sacrifice. That love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself or stay silent or accept cruelty. That sometimes the people who share your blood are the least equipped to care for your heart. You know what I realized? I said to Margaret. Family isn't determined by DNA. It's determined by who shows up, who stays when things are hard, who celebrates you without needing something in return. Margaret smiled. Like us. Like us, I agreed. You didn't know I had money when you helped me. You helped because you saw me as someone who mattered. That's more valuable than $80 million. The sky was almost dark now, stars beginning to appear. I thought about Jennifer somewhere in a federal prison serving year 1 of 18. I thought about my mother and siblings living their lives without me in it, probably telling themselves some revised version of events where they were the victims. I thought about the family I'd been born into and the family I'd chosen. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their apologies or their understanding. I didn't need revenge or vindication or anything from them at all. What I needed, I'd already built a life that was mine on my terms, surrounded by people who chose to love me for who I was, rather than what I could give them. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. Not because you hate someone, but because you respect yourself too much to keep accepting less than you deserve. I'd spent 36 years hoping my family would change, would see me, would value me. I'd survived attempts on my life at 8 years old and again at 36. I'd been invisible, exploited, nearly murdered. But I'd also survived. I'd uncovered the truth. I'd found justice. I'd built something better from the ashes of everything I'd lost. Margaret squeezed my hand as we watched the last light fade from the sky. "You're free now," she said softly. She was right. I was free. They thought killing me would end the story, but I didn't need to die to be reborn. So that's my story. That's how I went from being the invisible child who was never chosen to the woman who won $80 million and nearly lost her life to someone who finally understands what it means to be free. If you'd asked me a year ago what I wanted from all of this, I would have said justice. I wanted Jennifer in prison. I wanted my family to face consequences. I wanted the world to know what they'd done to me. And I got all of that. Jennifer is serving 18 years. The truth came out. Justice was served. But here's what I didn't expect: justice wasn't what healed me. It wasn't the courtroom verdict or the prison sentence, or even the moment Jennifer's face went white when she realized I was still alive. What healed me was something much simpler and much harder. It was the choice to walk away. It was learning that I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their understanding to move forward with my life. The real lesson I learned isn't about money or revenge or even about family betrayal. It's about knowing your worth. It's about understanding that you don't owe loyalty to people who've only ever shown you cruelty, even if you share their blood. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to leave to start over, to build something new from ashes. Family should be the people who show up when you have nothing to give. Family should be reciprocal, supportive, genuine. If the people who raised you can't be that, you have every right to find family elsewhere. You have every right to choose yourself. I spent 36 years invisible, hoping that if I was good enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, they would finally see me and love me. I was wrong. But I wasn't weak for hoping. I was human. And when I finally had the courage to stop hoping and start protecting myself instead, that's when my real life began. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been the giver in a family of takers, if you've been invisible or exploited, or told that setting boundaries makes you selfish, I want you to hear this. You matter. Your needs matter. Your pain matters. And you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Loving yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from family? Have you ever tested someone's loyalty and been shocked by what you found? Or maybe you're in a situation right now where you're not sure if you should stay or go forgive or protect yourself. Share your story in the comments below. This community is a safe space, and you're not alone. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or see your own life differently, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. I share these experiences not for sympathy, but because I believe truth has power. I believe that when we stop hiding our pain and start speaking our truth, we help other people find their courage too. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's struggling with toxic family dynamics, or questioning whether they're being too sensitive, or wondering if it's okay to choose themselves, share this video with them. Sometimes we need to hear someone else's story to understand our own. Thank you for listening to mine. Thank you for being here. And remember, they thought killing me would end the story. But I didn't need to die to be reborn. Neither do you.